Welcome, friend, to another journey together. We are so glad you've chosen to spend your time with us. Tonight, we will explore profound insights, long whispered through generations of Zen masters, designed to quiet the ceaseless noise of the mind and usher in deep, restorative peace. Feel free to share what time it is and where you are listening from. We will explore a carefully chosen selection of ancient Zen and Buddhist stories, each a potent key to stopping your thoughts, unlocking mental freedom and emotional liberation. These are not merely tales, they are living teachings, imbued with a transformative power capable of shifting your entire relationship with stress, anxiety, relentless overthinking, and the endless pursuit of external validation. These narratives are meticulously preserved wisdom, passed down from those who understood a truth most of us have forgotten: that true tranquility isn't found by rearranging the world around us, but by transforming our inner landscape. As it is said in the Zen tradition, when the mind is quiet, the soul can speak. Over the course of our journey, you'll discover precisely how these timeless truths can gently guide you to a state of profound understanding and deep rest. As we go deeper on our remarkable journey, you'll notice something powerful begin to happen. The tight grip of worry will gently loosen. The constant chatter of your thoughts will gradually recede. You will find yourself naturally settling into a state of profound peace and clarity. So settle in deeply now. Let your body surrender to whatever supports you. Take one conscious breath with me, and as you exhale, know that you're about to receive teachings that have been waiting to meet you since time immemorial. Let us begin our journey with a story about perspective and the nature of understanding. This is the weaver's pattern. In a village renowned for its exquisite textiles, there lived a Zen master named Juro, who had once been a master weaver. His hands, though now weathered by years of meditation, still remembered the feel of silk threads and the rhythm of the loom. One autumn morning, a young monk arrived at his dwelling, his face tight with frustration and his movements restless with agitation. "Master Juro," the young monk said, bowing deeply but unable to hide the tension in his voice, "I have devoted myself completely to the path. I meditate for hours until my legs ache. I study the sutras until my eyes burn, and I follow every precept with unwavering discipline. Yet my mind remains a tangled mess of threads. Thoughts pull in every direction, emotions knot together, and I cannot find any pattern or meaning in this chaos. How do I untangle this confusion? How do I find the pattern that everyone speaks of?" Master Juro listened with patient attention, his eyes kind but penetrating. Without speaking, he gestured for the monk to follow him. They walked across the small courtyard to a modest workshop where Juro's old loom stood, still and silent. Upon it was stretched a half-finished piece of cloth, a work that had been abandoned years ago when Juro had fully embraced the monastic life. "Tell me what you see," Juro said simply, his voice barely above a whisper. The monk approached the loom and examined the fabric carefully. From where they stood, the underside of the weaving faced them, a chaotic landscape of loose threads, knots, and seemingly random colors. Burgundy threads crossed over gold ones without apparent purpose. Blue strands hung loose and unfinished. Knots and starts and stops created what appeared to be a meaningless jumble of materials. "It is a mess," the monk said, his voice filled with disappointment. There is no rhyme or reason to any of it. It is ugly and confusing, exactly like my mind. How can something so beautiful be created from such chaos? Master Juro said nothing. He simply walked around to the other side of the loom, his footsteps soft on the wooden floor. With a gentle gesture, he invited the monk to join him. As the monk moved to this new vantage point, his breath caught in his throat. From this side, the same threads that had appeared chaotic now came together in a breathtaking pattern. A magnificent crane was taking flight against a blue sky, its wings spread wide in elegant motion. Every thread had its purpose, every color its place in the grand design. What had seemed like meaningless knots were actually the intricate details that gave the crane's feathers their texture and life. The loose threads created the impression of wind and movement. The piece was not incomplete. It was perfectly, intentionally unfinished, capturing a moment of eternal flight. Master Juro placed a gentle hand on the monk's shoulder. "The mind is not a problem to be solved," he said softly, his words carrying the weight of years of understanding. "It is a pattern to be seen from a different side. The Buddha once said, 'Everything we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become.' What emerges from this story is our fundamental misunderstanding about the nature of consciousness and the spiritual path. We assume that enlightenment means eliminating the apparent chaos of our mental experience, when in truth, it means discovering the inherent pattern that was always there. Why do we struggle so intensely with what we perceive as mental confusion? Zen Buddhism reveals that our suffering comes not from the thoughts themselves, but from our perspective on them. When we identify completely with our thinking mind, we experience ourselves as trapped within the chaos, seeing only loose threads and meaningless knots. We judge our meditation as poor, our emotions as problematic, our wandering attention as failure. Consider how often throughout your day you become frustrated with your mind's behavior. You sit down to focus on work, but thoughts of dinner plans intrude. You try to be present with a friend, but worries about tomorrow's meeting pull your attention away. You attempt to meditate, but your mind fills with everything from grocery lists to childhood memories. From the perspective of someone caught within these experiences, they seem random, disruptive, and counterproductive. But what if, like Master Juro's weaving, there is an inherent pattern to our mental experience that becomes visible only when we shift our perspective? Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi taught, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This apparent contradiction points to the same truth revealed in the weaver's story. The improvement we need is not in fixing our minds, but in changing our relationship to them. The crane in the tapestry represents the natural wisdom and beauty that emerges when we stop trying to control our experience and start observing it with spacious awareness. In meditation, this might mean noticing how thoughts arise and pass away like clouds in an open sky. In daily life, it might mean recognizing how our various emotions and reactions are all part of a larger intelligence attempting to navigate life's complexities. Zen Master Dogen wrote, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." This forgetting is not about becoming unconscious, but about loosening our grip on the fixed perspective that sees only chaos. When we stop identifying so completely with the thinking mind, we can step back and witness the beautiful pattern of consciousness itself. Modern neuroscience supports this ancient wisdom. What we experience as random thoughts are actually the brain's incredibly sophisticated processes of memory consolidation, problem solving, and creative synthesis, happening below the threshold of conscious control. The default mode network that becomes active during rest and meditation is not malfunction. It's the mind's natural pattern of integration and healing. Tonight, as you settle into the quiet of sleep, let your thoughts be like the threads on Master Juro's loom. Instead of trying to control or organize them, simply observe them from a different perspective. Allow your mind to shift from the chaotic underside to the peaceful overview where all thoughts find their natural place. Let each wandering thought be just another thread in the tapestry of consciousness, neither good nor bad, simply part of the larger pattern that emerges when you stop trying to manage the weaving. As your breathing deepens and your body relaxes, trust that your mind knows how to create beauty even in apparent disorder. As the Buddha taught, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The pattern we seek is not something to be created, but something to be recognized. As you drift towards sleep, the beautiful crane of awakened awareness is already there, waiting to be seen from the restful perspective of letting go. Our next story reveals the wisdom of stillness in a world that demands constant action. This is the Governor's Well. In the mountainous region of an ancient province, there lived a governor known throughout the land for his efficiency and stern dedication to duty. His days began before dawn and ended long after darkness fell, filled with an endless stream of legal disputes, administrative decisions, and complex negotiations with neighboring provinces. His mind, like a great machine, processed laws, regulations, and strategic plans without rest. Yet despite his worldly success, a deep unease had settled in his chest, a restlessness that no amount of achievement could quiet. Word had reached him of a wise hermit who lived in simplicity high in the mountains, far from the concerns of governance and politics. Driven by curiosity and a growing desperation for peace, the governor decided to make the difficult journey to seek this mysterious teacher. After a steep climb along narrow paths, he found the old man sitting beside a simple stone well, so still he might have been carved from the same rock. "Old man," the governor said, his voice carrying the authority he was accustomed to using, "I have traveled far to see you. I bear the weight of thousands of citizens on my shoulders. My mind is never quiet. It is always full of laws that need writing, disputes that need settling, and plans that need implementing. Every decision affects countless lives, and I have no peace, day or night. What wisdom can you offer someone with such responsibilities?" The hermit looked up with eyes that seemed to hold the depth of still water. Without speaking, he picked up a wooden bucket that sat beside the well, attached it to a rope, and lowered it slowly into the depths. When he drew it up, the water inside was crystal clear and perfectly still. The surface was like polished glass, undisturbed by even the slightest ripple. "Look," the hermit said simply, gesturing toward the bucket. The governor approached and peered into the water. There, reflected with perfect clarity, was his own face, but he hardly recognized it. The features that looked back at him were deeply lined with tension, the eyes surrounded by shadows of exhaustion, the mouth tight with the constant pressure of decision-making. He saw, perhaps for the first time, the true cost of his relentless mental activity. Then, without warning, the hermit picked up a stick and began stirring the water vigorously. The clear surface transformed into a swirling, muddy chaos. Sediment rose from the bottom, creating a turbulent brown cloud that made the water completely opaque. The governor's reflection disappeared entirely, replaced by a churning mass of disturbed earth and water. "Now," said the hermit, setting down the stick and looking directly at the governor, "find your reflection." The governor stared intently at the turbulent water, leaning closer and adjusting his position, trying every angle to catch a glimpse of his image. "It's impossible," he said finally, frustration creeping into his voice. "I can see nothing but mud and confusion." The hermit nodded slowly. "You come to me seeking peace, yet you spend your days stirring the water of your mind. You add more laws when existing ones would suffice, more plans when simpler solutions exist, more thoughts when fewer would serve better. You believe that more activity will bring clarity, but you are stirring up the very mud that obscures your vision." He gestured toward the bucket. "You don't need to do anything to clear this water. You don't need to remove the mud or add special chemicals. You simply need to stop stirring and let the mud settle." Buddha's wisdom reminds us, meditation brings wisdom. Lack of meditation leaves ignorance. Know well what leads you forward and what holds you back. The heart of this lesson lies in understanding the difference between productive action and the frantic mental activity that clouds our judgment. Why do we become so addicted to stirring the water of our minds? Zen Buddhism points to our deep conditioning that equates busyness with importance and mental activity with intelligence. We live in a culture that celebrates the governor's approach, the person who can juggle multiple responsibilities, make quick decisions, and maintain constant mental engagement. Yet this very approach often prevents us from accessing the clear seeing that enables truly wise action. Look deeply at your own experience. How often do you add unnecessary complexity to simple situations? When facing a challenge at work, do you immediately begin generating multiple backup plans, contingency strategies, and elaborate solutions? When someone says something that upsets you, does your mind immediately begin crafting responses, analyzing their motives, and rehearsing future conversations? Each of these mental activities is another stick stirring the water. The governor represents the part of us that believes we must think our way to peace. We analyze our problems, strategize solutions, and mentally rehearse outcomes, assuming that more mental processing will lead to clarity. But as Zen teacher John Kabat-Zinn observes, you can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf. The waves of thoughts and responsibilities will continue, but we can learn to stop adding to their turbulence. The clear reflection in the still water represents our natural wisdom, what Zen calls beginner's mind or Buddha nature. This clarity is always present beneath the surface turbulence, but it can only be accessed when we stop stirring. In practical terms, this might mean taking 3 conscious breaths before responding to a difficult email, sitting quietly for 5 minutes before making an important decision, or, especially relevant for those listening at bedtime, simply pausing to ask, what mental activity am I adding right now that isn't necessary for rest? As we prepare for sleep, we can practice letting our thoughts settle naturally, like sediment in still water, rather than engaging with every worry or plan that arises. The Buddha said, "Nothing can harm you as much as your own thoughts unguarded." Our greatest challenges often come not from external circumstances, but from our mental reactions to those circumstances. The governor's real problem wasn't the complexity of his responsibilities, it was his inability to access the clear seeing that would allow him to handle them skillfully. Zen practice offers what might be called wise non-action. This doesn't mean becoming passive or irresponsible, but rather learning to act from stillness rather than agitation. When the water of the mind is clear, we can see situations accurately and respond appropriately. When it's stirred up with anxiety, overthinking, and compulsive planning, even our best intentions can create more problems than they solve. Consider the difference between a surgeon who operates with calm precision and one whose hands shake with nervousness. Both may have identical training and knowledge, but only one can access that knowledge effectively. The still mind is like the steady hand. It allows our wisdom and skills to function optimally. Tonight, as you prepare to release the day's responsibilities and tomorrow's concerns, remember the hermit's wisdom about letting the water settle. As you lie down to rest, notice how your mind might still be churning with thoughts of unfinished tasks, conversations from the day, or plans for tomorrow. Instead of stirring these thoughts with more analysis or worry, simply stop adding the stick of mental activity. Let your thoughts be like the sediment in the bucket. Acknowledge them without engaging them and allow them to naturally settle as your body relaxes into sleep. With each exhale, release the need to solve, plan, or control. Trust that the clarity you seek will emerge naturally from the stillness of rest. As the Buddha taught, calm mind brings inner strength and self-confidence, so that's very important for good health. The governor's journey reminds us that true peace comes not from constant mental control, but from the spacious awareness that allows wisdom to emerge naturally, especially in the restful surrender of sleep. Let us continue on our journey with a tale about guilt and the weight of past mistakes. This is the shadow's debt. In a monastery nestled between rolling hills and ancient pine forests, there lived a monk named Koji, whose days were colored by a persistent darkness that seemed to follow him wherever he went. While his fellow monks moved through their daily practices with relative lightness, Koji carried himself as if bearing an invisible burden. His shoulders curved inward, his eyes often cast downward, and even his breathing seemed labored with the weight of unspoken shame. One morning, after the community's meditation session, Koji approached his master with the familiar heaviness that had become his constant companion. The master, an elderly woman whose presence seemed to radiate both strength and compassion, was tending to a small garden behind the meditation hall, her movements careful and deliberate as she watered young seedlings. "Master," Koji said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I must speak with you about something that torments me day and night. My past actions follow me like a shadow I cannot escape. Before I came to this monastery, I was not a good person. I spoke harshly to those I loved. I was selfish in my dealings with others, and I made choices that caused real harm. I feel as though I am always paying a debt for these mistakes, and the weight of it is crushing me. No matter how much I meditate, how strictly I follow the precepts, or how hard I work to be better, this guilt remains. It feels like a darkness that defines me." The master listened with complete attention, her hands still among the plants. When Koji finished speaking, she looked up at him with eyes that seemed to hold both the depth of understanding and the lightness of compassion. She stood slowly, brushing the earth from her hands. "Koji," she said gently, "you are absolutely right to be concerned about your shadow. Come with me into the courtyard, where we can examine it properly." She led him outside into the bright noon sun, where the light fell directly overhead in the intense way that only midday sun can. "You see," the master said, pointing downward, "there it is, your shadow. It is indeed dark and clings to you wherever you go. It is quite persistent, isn't it?" Koji looked down and saw his shadow clearly defined on the stone path, a dark silhouette that perfectly mirrored his form. "Yes, master, this is exactly what I mean. It follows me everywhere." "Since you are so troubled by it," the master continued, "perhaps you should try to get rid of it. Go ahead, free yourself from this shadow that burdens you." Confused but trusting, Koji began to run across the courtyard, thinking he might outrun his shadow. But no matter how fast he moved, the dark shape kept perfect pace with him. He tried jumping, hoping to leave it behind, but it leapt with him. He tried brushing at it with his hands, but they passed right through the darkness without effect. He even tried yelling at it, commanding it to leave him alone, but it remained silent and unmoved by his protests. After several minutes of increasingly desperate attempts, Koji collapsed on the ground, breathing heavily and covered in perspiration. "It's useless!" he cried out in frustration. "It will not leave me. I cannot escape it, no matter what I do." "Indeed," said the master calmly, pointing across the courtyard. "But look over there." Koji raised his head and saw a great, spreading oak tree that grew near the monastery wall. Its ancient branches created a pool of deep shade that covered a large portion of the courtyard. "Go stand beneath that tree," the master instructed. Still breathing hard from his futile efforts, Koji walked over and positioned himself in the shade of the massive oak. He looked down, expecting to see his shadow as clearly as before, but it had completely vanished. The shadow of the tree was so large and encompassing that his own small shadow had been absorbed into it entirely. In the greater darkness, his personal shadow simply disappeared. "You see, Koji," the master said, joining him under the tree, "you cannot erase your shadow by fighting it, denying it, or running from it. Your shadow, like your past, is an inseparable part of who you are in the light, but you can choose to stand in a greater shade." As the Buddha observed, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. This ancient wisdom illuminates the futile cycle of fighting our own darkness with more darkness. The greater shade that the Master speaks of is not the denial of our past mistakes, but the embrace of a larger compassion that can hold both our light and shadow. Why do we struggle so intensely with guilt and shame over our past actions? Zen Buddhism recognizes that guilt, while appearing to be a moral response, often becomes a form of self-centeredness, a way of making our past mistakes all about us, rather than learning from them and moving forward. When we become identified with our guilt, we create what might be called a shadow identity, defining ourselves primarily by our worst moments rather than our full humanity. Consider how guilt actually functions in your daily life. Perhaps you spoke harshly to your child last week, and now every interaction is colored by self-reproach. Maybe you made a professional mistake months ago, and you still replay it mentally, analyzing what you should have done differently. Or perhaps, like Koji, you carry deeper regrets about how you treated people in your past. Each time you revisit these memories with shame, you're like Koji running frantically in the sun, trying to escape your shadow. The futility of fighting our shadows becomes clear when we recognize that guilt often perpetuates the very behaviors it claims to address. When we're consumed with self-reproach, we become less present, less patient, and less capable of the kindness that could prevent future harm. The energy we spend on guilt is energy unavailable for positive action in the present moment. Zen teacher Pema Chodron writes, "Compassion is not a relationship between the healer and the wounded. It's a relationship between equals. Only when we know our own darkness well can we be present with the darkness of others." The great oak tree in the story represents this larger compassion, the recognition that all human beings struggle with imperfection, that making mistakes is part of the human condition, not a personal failing that defines us. Standing in the greater shade doesn't mean minimizing the impact of our past actions or avoiding responsibility. Instead, it means placing our personal shadow in the context of universal human experience. When we truly understand that all beings struggle with greed, anger, and delusion, our personal failures become part of a larger story of learning and growth, rather than evidence of our fundamental unworthiness. The Buddha said, "If you truly loved yourself, you would never harm yourself with negative thoughts." The shadow debt that Koji carried was not justice. It was self-violence masquerading as morality. True atonement for past mistakes comes not through self-punishment, but through the kind of presence and compassion that prevents future harm. Practically, finding the greater shade might mean joining a community of others who are also working with their mistakes, engaging in service that helps heal the kind of harm you once caused, or simply practicing the self-compassion that allows you to be fully present for others. When we stop fighting our shadows, we can use our energy more skillfully. Tonight, as you notice the familiar weight of old regrets or the sharp sting of recent mistakes, can you remember the oak tree? Instead of running from your shadow or trying to brush it away, can you find the greater shade of compassion that holds all of human experience? Perhaps you'll discover that your past mistakes, rather than defining you, have taught you the very empathy that allows you to help others. As the Buddha taught, the past is gone, the future is not yet here, and you have only this moment. In the shade of present moment compassion, even our deepest shadows can become sources of wisdom and connection, rather than separation and shame. Now, let us explore a Zen story about the barriers we create in our own minds. This is the gate that isn't there. High in the mountains, along a winding path known only to a few dedicated seekers, stood the entrance to a monastery, famous throughout the region for its reclusive master. This teacher, it was said, possessed such profound wisdom that even a brief encounter could transform a person's understanding of life itself. Yet reaching him was notoriously difficult, not because of the arduous mountain journey, but because of what awaited travelers at the path's end. The way terminated at a magnificent, imposing gate that rose 15 feet high and was constructed of dark, polished wood bound with iron. The gate was set perfectly between two massive stone walls that extended in both directions, creating what appeared to be an impenetrable barrier. Intricate carvings covered every inch of the gate's surface. Dragons, phoenixes, and swirling clouds that seemed to move in the shifting mountain light. Most remarkable of all, the gate appeared to have no visible means of opening. There was no handle, no latch, no keyhole, and no apparent mechanism that might allow entry. For months, then years, seekers would arrive at this gate with high hopes and profound dedication. They would sit before it in meditation for days at a time, examining every detail, running their hands along its surface, searching for hidden mechanisms or secret passwords. Some tried to decode the meaning of the carvings, believing them to be a puzzle that, once solved, would grant access. Others attempted to push against the gate with all their physical strength, thinking that raw determination might force it open. Many brought tools from the village below, trying to find weaknesses in the wood or ways to climb over the stone walls. The desperate lengths to which people went became legendary. Some fasted for weeks, believing that hunger might reveal spiritual insights about opening the gate. Others chanted mantras for days, hoping the right combination of sounds would trigger a response. A few even attempted to dig beneath the walls, only to discover that the stones extended deep into the mountain bedrock. Most eventually gave up and returned home, frustrated and defeated, convinced that they lacked some essential quality or knowledge required for entry. They would tell others that the monastery was impossible to reach, that the master was probably a myth, and that the whole journey was an elaborate deception. One crisp autumn morning, a young traveler arrived at the gate. Unlike many who had come before him with elaborate plans and sophisticated equipment, he carried only a simple walking stick and a small bag of provisions. He had heard the stories of the impossible barrier, but something in his approach was different from the beginning. After studying the magnificent gate for exactly one day, not weeks or months, he simply sighed with what seemed like gentle acceptance rather than frustration. He stood up, brushed the dust from his robes, and began walking. But instead of turning back down the mountain path in defeat, he walked 20 paces to the left, where the massive stone wall simply ended. He walked around it. On the other side, he found a peaceful garden where the master sat quietly beneath a flowering cherry tree, as if he had been waiting for this moment all along. The master's eyes held a gentle amusement, the kind of expression one might have when watching a child solve a puzzle that had seemed impossibly complex. "You spent a long time looking at the gate," the master said, his voice carrying both warmth and gentle humor. The young traveler sat down across from him, setting his walking stick aside. "I was admiring the craftsmanship," he replied with equal lightness. "It truly is a work of art, but a gate is only a gate if you decide it is the only way through. As the Buddha understood, the greatest revelation is stillness." What emerges from this story is our tendency to create elaborate obstacles where simple solutions exist. The gate represents all the barriers we construct in our minds, the complex problems we create through overthinking, the impossible standards we set for ourselves, and the belief that spiritual progress must be difficult to be authentic. Why do we become so mesmerized by gates that aren't actually blocking our path? Zen Buddhism points to several patterns of mind that create this phenomenon. First is our conditioning that valuable things must be hard to obtain. We assume that if something is truly worthwhile, whether it's enlightenment, love, success, or happiness, it must require extraordinary effort, sacrifice, or special knowledge to achieve. Second is what might be called problem fascination, the mind's tendency to become so absorbed in analyzing a difficulty that we lose sight of alternatives. Like the seekers who spent months studying the gate's carvings, we can become hypnotized by the complexity of our challenges, convinced that the solution must be equally complex. Third is our attachment to specific outcomes and methods. The travelers assumed that the gate was the only legitimate entrance, just as we often assume that our problems must be solved in particular ways. We might spend years trying to fix a difficult relationship through the same ineffective communication patterns, or attempt to find career satisfaction by climbing a ladder that's leaning against the wrong wall. Look deeply at your own experience. What gates are you sitting before, convinced they must be opened through force, cleverness, or endurance? Perhaps you're struggling to force yourself to love a job that fundamentally doesn't suit you, instead of exploring different career paths. Maybe you're trying to make peace with a family member through increasingly elaborate conversations, rather than simply accepting the relationship as it is. Or possibly, you're attempting to achieve inner peace through complex spiritual practices, while overlooking the simple awareness available in this moment. Zen teacher Alan Watts often spoke about what he called the backwards law, the idea that the more we try to force something, the more it eludes us. The magnificent gate in our story represents this perfectly. The more elaborate the seeker's efforts became, the further they moved from the simple solution that was always available. The young traveler's approach offers a different way of engaging with obstacles. Instead of assuming that barriers are meant to be overcome through force or cleverness, he remained open to the possibility that they might be invitations to find another way. His willingness to walk around the wall represents what Zen calls don't know mind, the humble recognition that our first assumptions about how things work might be incorrect. This doesn't mean avoiding all challenges or taking the easy way out of legitimate difficulties. Rather, it means maintaining enough flexibility to recognize when we're banging our heads against walls that exist primarily in our own thinking. Sometimes the most direct path is the one we haven't considered because it seems too simple or doesn't match our preconceptions about how things should work. The Buddha said, "Thousands of candles can be lighted from a single candle, and the life of the candle will not be shortened. Happiness never decreases by being shared." Often, the gates we struggle to open alone simply dissolve when we're willing to walk around them with the humility to ask for help, try a different approach, or abandon our attachment to solving things in a particular way. Tonight, as you consider the challenges currently facing you, can you remember the young traveler? Instead of assuming that the obstacles in your path must be overcome through force or complex strategies, can you step back and look for the path around the wall? Perhaps you'll discover that many of your most persistent problems exist only as long as you continue to believe they're the only way through. As the Buddha taught, everything we need is inside us. We just need to access it. The gate that seems to block our way is often nothing more than our own belief that it's the only path forward. True wisdom lies not in becoming better at opening impossible gates, but in developing the flexibility to walk around them. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a final story about direct experience and the nature of true understanding. This is the taste of the mountain. In a monastery perched on the slopes of a mountain known for its pristine springs and ancient forests, there lived a student who had become increasingly frustrated with what he perceived as the abstract nature of Zen teaching. Master Etsu, the monastery's teacher, was known for her direct yet enigmatic style of instruction, often speaking of concepts that seemed to float just beyond intellectual grasp. One morning, after a particularly challenging meditation session where his mind had felt scattered and unclear, the student approached Master Etsu with barely contained exasperation. She was sitting in her simple quarters, the morning light filtering through bamboo screens and casting gentle shadows across the tatami mats. "Master," he said, trying to keep his voice respectful despite his inner turmoil, "you always speak of direct experience, of knowing our true nature beyond concepts and words. But how can I experience something I cannot see or grasp?" My mind feels like it's reaching for smoke. I understand the teachings intellectually. I can recite the sutras and explain the principles. But this direct experience you speak of remains completely elusive. How can I touch what cannot be touched? How can I know what cannot be known? Master Etsu listened with the complete attention that was her hallmark, her presence both gentle and utterly alert. When the student finished speaking, she reached beside her cushion and picked up a plain wooden cup worn smooth by years of use. She extended it toward him. "Go to the spring on the north side of the mountain," she said, her voice carrying a quiet authority that suggested this was not a casual request. "Fill this cup with water and bring it back to me. But listen carefully. You must not spill a single drop, not one." The student looked at the cup, then at his teacher, confusion evident on his face. After all his earnest questioning about the deepest mysteries of existence, she was giving him what seemed like a simple, almost childish task. His frustration deepened, but he had learned enough about Zen teaching to know that arguing with such instructions was pointless. He took the cup and bowed, though his movements carried a stiffness that revealed his annoyance. The path to the North Spring was one he had walked many times during his months at the monastery, but never with such specific attention to a single object. As he began the journey, cup in hand, he quickly realized that Master Etsu's instruction was far more challenging than it had initially appeared. The mountain path was steep and rocky, with loose stones that could easily cause a stumble. Tree roots crossed the trail at unexpected intervals, and morning dew had made many surfaces slippery. To prevent even the smallest splash from escaping the cup, he found himself moving with extraordinary care. Each step required complete attention to the placement of his feet, the balance of his body, and the steadiness of his hands. When the wind picked up, he had to adjust his pace and posture to protect the water from disturbance. At stream crossings, he had to find the most stable rocks and move with the precision of a dancer. As the journey continued, something unexpected began to happen. The mental chatter that usually filled his mind, the constant commentary, analysis, and self-criticism gradually fell away. There was no room for his typical internal dialogue when every fiber of his attention was required for the immediate task. His world narrowed to the essential elements, the water in the cup, the next step, the rhythm of his breathing, the feel of the mountain air on his skin. The familiar path revealed itself with startling new detail. He noticed the distinct fragrance of different types of pine needles, the subtle variations in the quality of light as it filtered through various densities of forest canopy, and the complex symphony of mountain sounds. Bird calls, rustling leaves, the distant murmur of streams, and the soft crunch of earth beneath his feet. The water in the cup seemed to carry the stillness of the mountain itself, and maintaining its perfect level required him to embody that same quality of peaceful alertness. When he finally reached the spring hours later, his legs ached with fatigue, but his mind had achieved a clarity he had never experienced before. The simple act of filling the cup became a meditation in itself. Watching the clear water rise, feeling its coolness, ensuring no drop was lost. The return journey required the same exquisite attention, the same complete presence. When he finally arrived back at Master Etsu's quarters, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the monastery grounds. He was physically exhausted, but filled with a strange, vibrant calm. He approached his teacher and carefully presented the cup, its contents still perfectly full. "Master," he said, his voice now carrying a different quality than it had that morning, I have brought the water as you requested. Master Etsu looked at the cup, but made no move to take it. I am not thirsty, she replied with the hint of a smile. But tell me, what did the mountain taste like? The student opened his mouth to answer, but stopped before any words emerged. In that moment, he realized that his question about direct experience had been answered not through explanation, but through embodiment. In his intense focus on preserving the water, he had somehow tasted the mountain itself, not with his mouth, but with his entire being. He had breathed its air so consciously that it became part of him, felt its textures so completely that the boundaries between observer and observed had dissolved, and moved through its landscape with such presence that he had become temporarily inseparable from the environment itself. He bowed deeply to Master Etsu, understanding flooding through him like the spring water that had filled his cup. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it, but after observation and analysis, when you find that anything agrees with reason and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. The deeper teaching here shows us that authentic spiritual understanding cannot be transmitted through words alone, but must be lived directly through our complete engagement with present experience. Why do we struggle so persistently with the gap between intellectual understanding and direct realization? Zen Buddhism reveals that our thinking mind, while useful for many purposes, can become a barrier to immediate experience when we try to use it to grasp what can only be known through direct participation. We attempt to understand the taste of water by analyzing its chemical composition, or comprehend the beauty of music by studying acoustic theory, missing the simple reality that some knowledge can only be accessed through direct engagement. Look deeply at your own relationship with experience. How often do you find yourself standing at the edge of life, analyzing and thinking about participation rather than simply participating? Perhaps you spend more time reading about meditation than actually sitting in stillness, or more energy planning future adventures than fully inhabiting your current experiences. Like the student before his journey, we can become trapped in the assumption that understanding must come through mental processes, rather than through the wholehearted engagement with whatever is actually happening. The water in the cup represents any activity that requires our complete presence. When we bring total attention to simple tasks, washing dishes, walking, listening to another person, or even breathing, these ordinary actions become gateways to the direct experience we seek. The key is not the specialness of the activity, but the quality of attention we bring to it. Zen teacher Jon Kabat-Zinn describes this as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. The student's intense focus on preserving the water created exactly these conditions. He was completely purposeful, entirely present, and because his attention was absorbed in the task itself, he temporarily transcended the judging mind that usually separates him from direct experience. The mountain's taste that the student discovered represents what Zen calls suchness, the direct experience of reality before the mind divides it into concepts like subject and object, self and other, pleasant and unpleasant. In moments of complete presence, these artificial divisions dissolve, and we taste life directly rather than through the filter of our thoughts about life. Modern neuroscience confirms what contemplatives have known for centuries. When we engage in activities requiring complete attention, the brain's default mode network, responsible for self-referential thinking and mental wandering, becomes less active. In these states, people consistently report experiences of flow, connection, and what might be called direct knowing. The Buddha said, "The present moment is the only time over which we have dominion." Each moment offers us the same opportunity the student received, to taste reality directly through complete engagement with what is actually happening, rather than our thoughts about what is happening. Tonight, as you prepare for sleep, can you remember the student's cup? Instead of thinking about your day or planning tomorrow, can you bring complete attention to the simple experience of resting? Perhaps you'll taste the texture of your bed sheets, the rhythm of your breathing, or the weight of relaxation in your body. In such moments of total presence, you might discover that the direct experience you seek has been available all along. As the Buddha taught, the wise find pleasure in the truth and do not wander far from it. The truth we seek is not hidden in complex philosophy or exotic experiences. It is as close as our next conscious breath, as available as our willingness to taste whatever mountain we are currently climbing. Our next story reveals the profound difference between spiritual performance and authentic understanding. This is the teaching of the head that wished to be severed. In the great monastery of Chao Chu, where hundreds of monks gathered daily for meditation and study, the morning routines followed ancient rhythms. After the pre-dawn sitting, as the first light touched the mountain peaks surrounding the monastery, monks would disperse to their various duties, some to the gardens, others to the kitchens, still others to copying sacred texts or maintaining the buildings. One particular morning, the Venerable Abbot Chao Cho made his customary walk through the monastery grounds, checking on the well-being of his students and the condition of their practice. His presence was both gentle and penetrating. Monks never knew when their most casual words might become profound teachings, or when their deepest spiritual insights might be revealed as mere intellectual concepts. As he passed behind the main meditation hall, a building where the community gathered twice daily for silent sitting, the abbot noticed a young monk sitting alone in the shadow of the wooden structure. The monk appeared to be engaged in some form of practice, though he was apart from the scheduled community activities. "Brother," Chao Cho called softly, approaching with the quiet steps that had become second nature through decades of mindful walking. "Where have all the virtuous ones gone?" The question seemed simple enough, almost like casual conversation, but those familiar with Chao Cho's teaching style recognized the subtle depth in his inquiry. Was he asking about physical location, spiritual attainment, or something else entirely? The young monk looked up with an expression of confident understanding. He had been at the monastery for several years and prided himself on grasping the essential points of Zen teaching. This seemed like an opportunity to demonstrate his comprehension of the Dharma. "They have all gone to work," the monk replied matter-of-factly, gesturing toward the various parts of the monastery where his brothers were engaged in their daily tasks. His tone suggested that the answer was obvious. Virtuous people naturally engage in productive activity rather than sitting idle. What happened next shocked the young monk completely. Without warning, Chao Cho reached into the folds of his robe and produced a sharp knife, its blade gleaming in the morning sunlight. But instead of threatening the monk, the abbot did something far more unsettling. With complete calmness, Chao Cho stretched out his own neck, exposing his throat to the blade, and handed the knife to the bewildered young monk. His voice remained gentle and conversational, as if he were making the most reasonable request in the world. "My responsibilities as abbot are many," and demanding, he said with apparent sincerity. "I wonder if you could please cut off my head for me. It would be such a help in managing my duties." The young monk's eyes widened in horror. His hands trembled as he stared at the knife now in his possession and the exposed neck of his revered teacher. Everything about the situation contradicted his understanding of proper monastic behavior, spiritual teaching, and basic human decency. Unable to comprehend what was being asked of him or why, unable to see past the literal surface of the abbot's request to any deeper meaning, the terrified monk dropped the knife and ran. His feet carried him far from the meditation hall, far from the incomprehensible scene, his mind reeling with confusion and fear. Cao Cho calmly picked up the fallen knife, tucked it back into his robe, and continued his morning walk with the same peaceful demeanor he had maintained throughout the entire encounter. As the Buddha observed, it is better to travel well than to arrive. What emerges from this story is a teaching about the vast difference between intellectual understanding and genuine realization. Why do we so often mistake conceptual knowledge for authentic wisdom? Zen Buddhism reveals that our thinking mind loves to collect spiritual ideas and organize them into neat categories, creating the illusion of understanding without the transformative experience of direct insight. The young monk's response, "They have all gone to work," represents the kind of dualistic thinking that separates spiritual practice from ordinary activity. His answer implied that virtue lies in doing productive tasks rather than sitting idly, revealing his assumption that awakened activity and rest exist in opposition to each other. But Cao Cho's teaching cuts much deeper than this surface interpretation. By offering his neck to the knife, he was asking a profound question. If the monk truly understood that all the virtuous ones had gone to work, what work was most essential? If responsibility truly mattered, what was the most compassionate response to suffering? Look deeply at your own spiritual assumptions. How often do we divide life into spiritual activities and mundane ones, important work and trivial tasks, sacred moments and ordinary time? This dualistic thinking keeps us from recognizing that every moment offers opportunities for awakened response. The abbot's gesture points toward the heart of Zen understanding. Genuine compassion sometimes requires actions that transcend conventional thinking. When someone is truly suffering under the burden of responsibility, attachment, or spiritual seeking itself, what is the most loving response? Sometimes it requires cutting through the very thing that seems most precious: our concepts, our roles, even our sense of separate self. Zen master Linji taught, "If you meet the Buddha on the road, kill the Buddha." This famous saying points to the same radical teaching Cao Cho offered. Any fixed idea about enlightenment, any attachment to spiritual roles or concepts, becomes an obstacle to direct realization. True compassion sometimes requires destroying the very thing we think we're trying to protect. The young monk's terror and flight revealed how completely he missed this deeper level of teaching. He remained trapped in literal interpretation, unable to see past the surface of the abbot's words to their transformative invitation. His spiritual understanding, though articulate, remained purely conceptual. Consider your own relationship to spiritual responsibility and helping others. When someone asks for help with their suffering, do we offer concepts and advice, or do we respond from a deeper place of understanding? Are we willing to sacrifice our comfortable spiritual positions to meet others exactly where they are? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between talking about virtue and embodying it. The monk could identify where virtuous people go and what they do, but when faced with an opportunity for radical compassion, he fled. His knowledge remained divorced from spontaneous, awakened action. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called great doubt, a willingness to question even our most cherished spiritual understandings. This doubt isn't cynicism, but openness to discoveries that transcend our current conceptual frameworks. Are we prepared to have our spiritual certainties challenged, even destroyed, if it serves awakening? Tonight, as you encounter opportunities to help others with their burdens, can you sense the difference between offering what you think they need and responding from genuine understanding? Can you feel how true compassion sometimes requires cutting through your own comfortable assumptions about what constitutes appropriate spiritual behavior? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "In caring for others, you care for yourself. In caring for yourself, you care for others." The abbot's offer to sacrifice his own head points toward this non-dual understanding. When we truly see interconnection, the boundaries between self and other, helper and helped, begin to dissolve into spontaneous, compassionate action. Let us now explore a story about the invisible burdens we carry through life. This is the tale of the empty backpack. In a serene monastery garden, where morning dew glistened on carefully tended paths, a young seeker approached his teacher with a question weighing heavily on his heart. His eyes reflected both determination and confusion as he bowed respectfully. "Master," he said, "I wish to understand my path on earth better. Why do I seem to carry my past and relive it again and again? Why can't I get past my past?" The master studied the young man with compassionate eyes, then gestured toward an intricate maze of translucent silk panels, shimmering in the garden's filtered sunlight. "Go forward into the maze," he said, reaching for a leather backpack. "But carry this as you walk. It will help you stay focused. Be careful though, as it is quite heavy." The young man accepted the backpack, initially surprised by how easily the master handed it over. But the moment it settled into his grasp, he gasped. The weight was extraordinary, forcing him to bend forward as he struggled toward the maze. Inside the silken labyrinth, he immediately encountered solid walls. Through the translucent material, he could see other seekers navigating their paths like distant ghosts. No matter which direction he turned, every path seemed blocked. Exhausted, he sat down to think. "Others are clearly ahead of me," he thought. "Should I cheat and crawl under the silk?" After wrestling with these thoughts, he chose integrity. As he stood with renewed resolve, an opening magically appeared. Progress felt rewarding until he faced another wall. This time, good intentions yielded no results. The backpack's weight became unbearable, cutting into his shoulders. What could be so heavy yet feel so soft? Overcome with curiosity, he removed the pack and peered inside. It was completely empty. Yet when he lifted it again, the weight remained undeniable. As he placed it back on his shoulders, a voice whispered clearly, "Look inside of you, young man, for the weight lies there." Suddenly, memories flooded his consciousness. His childhood tormentors, accumulated hurts, and resentments carried for years. As he relived each painful experience, the backpack grew heavier. Then understanding dawned. "I am the weight. I carry the burden of that which troubles me." With this insight, he began the work of forgiveness. "I forgive you, wherever you are," he found himself saying. Immediately, the pack lightened and new pathways opened. As sunlight warmed his face, and he remembered moments of love, The weight continued diminishing until the backpack felt weightless. Finally, surrounded by solid silk walls, he sat in meditation. I am the light and the way. I recognize that I was the impediment, not anyone else. At these words, his feet began rising from the earth. He floated above the maze, seeing how others remained trapped by darkness in their own packs. With a thought, he found himself beside his teacher outside the labyrinth. "Master," he said, his face radiant, "I discovered that my darkness caused my weight, and my lightness freed me to fly." The master smiled knowingly. "What do you feel, young one? Do you feel freed?" Without waiting for an answer, he walked away. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, holding on to anger is like grasping a hot coal with the intent of throwing it at someone else. You are the one who gets burned. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound truth revealed in the empty backpack story. We are the creators of our own burdens. What emerges from this tale is recognition that our past does not imprison us. Our relationship to our past does. The young seeker discovered that suffering came not from what others had done, but from his unwillingness to release those experiences. The empty backpack represents the invisible weight of unprocessed emotions and unhealed wounds we carry through life. Why do we cling so tenaciously to our pain? First is our identification with wounds. We derive identity from grievances, thinking, "I am someone who was wronged," rather than, "I experienced wronging, but I'm not defined by it." Second is our addiction to the familiar. Even painful emotions become comfortable because they're known. Third is our misunderstanding of forgiveness, believing it means condoning harmful behavior rather than freeing ourselves from resentment's prison. Consider how this plays out daily. The colleague who received credit for your idea still triggers anger. The parent who criticized you decades ago still influences your self-talk. Each is an invisible item in your backpack, weighing you down. Zen teacher Jack Cornfield taught, "Forgiveness is giving up all hope of having had a different past." We cannot change what happened, but we can change our relationship to what happened. The energy spent maintaining grievances could be redirected toward creating the life we actually want. The floating represents lightness available when we release psychological burdens. This isn't about bypassing pain, but processing experiences fully and choosing freedom over familiarity, growth over grievance. Tonight, as you prepare for rest, what invisible weight might you be carrying? Perhaps it's time to examine what you've been holding on to and ask, does this serve my highest good, or is it time to set it down? As the Buddha taught, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. The path to freedom begins with radical self-forgiveness and willingness to travel light through life's inevitable challenges. Let us continue on our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism with a story about the phantoms we create with our own minds. This is the tale of the haunting that was no haunting at all. A man lived peacefully with his beloved wife for many years, their love deep and genuine, their companionship a source of daily joy. But as fate would have it, she became gravely ill. As she lay on her deathbed, her breathing shallow and her strength fading, she grasped her husband's hand with surprising force. "My darling," she whispered, her eyes filled with both love and fear. "I cannot bear the thought of leaving you, and I cannot bear the thought of you loving another. Promise me that when I am gone, you will not see any other women. Promise me you will remain faithful to my memory forever, or I swear I will return from the grave to haunt you." The husband, his heart breaking at her words and her impending departure, made the promise she demanded. What else could he do? In that moment of grief and love, he would have agreed to anything to ease her suffering and honor their bond. For several months after her death, the widower kept his word. He avoided social gatherings, declined invitations, and turned away from any possibility of female companionship. His world became small and lonely, filled only with work and memories. But as time passed and the sharpest edge of grief began to soften, he found himself drawn back into the world of the living. It was at a local market that he met her, a kind woman with gentle eyes and a warm smile. Despite his promise to his deceased wife, he found himself drawn to this new person. Conversations led to friendship. Friendship deepened into affection. And eventually, despite his guilt and internal conflict, he fell in love again. The night he and his new love became engaged, his worst fears materialized. As he lay in bed, the room suddenly grew cold, and there before him stood the unmistakable figure of his dead wife. Her face was pale with anger, her eyes blazing with accusation. "You have broken your promise to me," she said, her voice carrying the chill of the grave. "You have betrayed our love and dishonored my memory." But what truly terrified the man was not just her appearance. It was her impossible knowledge. Night after night, she would return to torment him, recounting in perfect detail everything that had transpired between him and his fiancée. She would repeat their conversations word for word, describe their private moments, reveal their most intimate exchanges. Nothing remained hidden from this ghostly presence. The haunting became so intense that the man could no longer sleep. Dark circles formed under his eyes. His hands shook constantly, and his new relationship began to suffer under the weight of his terror and exhaustion. Desperate for relief, he sought out a Zen master who lived in a small temple near the village. "Master," the man said, his voice trembling as he recounted his story, "my dead wife's ghost appears to me every night. She knows everything I do, everything I say. She repeats our conversations exactly as they happened. I am being driven to madness." The old master listened carefully, stroking his beard thoughtfully. When the man finished his account, the master smiled knowingly. "This is indeed a very clever ghost," he said. "You should admire such supernatural wisdom. But I will tell you exactly what to do when she appears tonight." That evening, as the room grew cold and the familiar figure materialized, the man followed the master's instructions precisely. "You are truly a wise and all-knowing spirit," he said to the ghost. "You see everything I do and know everything I think. Since you possess such incredible powers and I can hide nothing from you, surely you can answer one simple question for me." "Ask your question," the ghost replied coldly. The man reached down to a large bag of beans that sat near his bedside table. He scooped up a handful and held his closed fist toward the apparition. "Tell me exactly how many beans I am holding in my hand right now." The ghost opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. Her form began to waver, becoming translucent around the edges. For the first time since her appearances began, she looked uncertain, even confused. I cannot," she stammered, and then, like morning mist touched by sunlight, she simply vanished. The ghost never returned again, and the man was finally free to live his life in peace. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, we are what we think. All that we are arises with our thoughts. With our thoughts, we make the world. The deeper teaching here shows us how powerfully our minds can create seemingly real experiences from nothing but guilt, fear, and unresolved emotions. Why do we give such power to the ghosts of our own making? Zen Buddhism reveals that much of our suffering comes not from external forces, but from the phantoms we create through our own psychological patterns. The ghost in this story was nothing more than the man's own guilt and conditioning, projected outward and given form by his tormented mind. Consider how often in your own life you are haunted by voices that seem to know your every move, that judge your every decision, that remind you of promises you've broken or standards you've failed to meet. These internalized critics often speak with the voices of people from our past, parents, teachers, former partners, but their power comes entirely from our own minds giving them substance. The man's ghost could recite his conversations perfectly because it was his own memory playing them back to him. It knew his private moments because it was created by his own consciousness. It appeared when his guilt was strongest because guilt was its very substance. The ghost was real in its effects, but had no independent existence. In Zen practice, we learn to distinguish between what is actually present and what our minds are adding to the situation. The man was genuinely in love with a new person, but his conditioning told him this was a betrayal. His deceased wife was genuinely gone, but his unprocessed grief and guilt kept her psychologically present. The master's solution was brilliant in its simplicity. By asking the ghost to know something that existed only in the present moment, something the man's own mind couldn't possibly know, he revealed the phantom's true nature. The beans in his hand were unknown even to him until he counted them. No amount of memory, guilt, or psychological projection could provide this information. Zen teacher Charlotte Joko Beck said, "Our thoughts are just thoughts. They're not necessarily true, they're not necessarily important, and they're not necessarily ours." The ghost's accusations felt absolutely real to the man, but they were simply thoughts and emotions given form by his own mental processes. Look deeply at your own experience. What ghosts do you carry that speak with impossible authority about your worth, your choices, your future? Often these voices claim to know things they cannot possibly know. What others really think of you, what will happen if you take risks, whether you deserve happiness or love. The Buddha taught, the mind is everything. What you think you become. When we understand that we are constantly creating our experience through the stories we tell ourselves, we begin to see that we also have the power to question these stories, to test their validity, to challenge their authority over our lives. Tonight, as you notice the familiar voices of self-doubt, guilt, or fear arising in your mind, can you remember the man and his handful of beans? Can you find the courage to ask these internal critics to prove their supernatural knowledge by answering questions they cannot possibly answer? Can you recognize that the very thoughts that seem to know everything about you actually know far less than they claim? As the Buddha observed, doubt everything, find your own light. The ghosts that haunt us lose their power the moment we stop feeding them with our belief, the moment we see them for what they truly are, not supernatural visitations, but creations of our own minds that can be dissolved as easily as they were formed. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about contentment and the nature of desire. This is the stonecutter's journey. High in the mountain villages, there lived a simple stonecutter who had discovered the secret of happiness without knowing it. Each dawn, he would climb winding paths to the quarries, his tools balanced across his shoulders. As he worked among the stones, he would sing old mountain songs that echoed across the valleys. Though he was poor by society's measures, living in a modest hut with few possessions, the stonecutter desired nothing more than what he had. His simple life felt complete. The rhythm of his work, the beauty of the mountains, the satisfaction of honest labor. His heart held not a care in the world. One day, he was called to work on the grand mansion of a wealthy nobleman. As he approached the estate, his eyes widened at the magnificence before him. Marble columns reached toward the sky, gardens sprawled in perfect symmetry. For the first time in his life, the stonecutter felt the sharp pang of desire pierce his contentment. "If only I were rich," he sighed. "Then I would not have to earn my living in sweat and toil as I do now." To his amazement, a voice whispered from the stones, "Your wish has been granted. Henceforth, anything you desire will be given to you." He returned home that evening to find his humble hut replaced by a mansion as magnificent as the nobleman's. Overwhelmed with joy, he abandoned his tools and began enjoying the luxurious life of the wealthy. But one hot afternoon, gazing from his ornate window, he saw the king's royal procession passing by. The monarch sat in cool shade, surrounded by noblemen and servants, appearing serene and powerful above the common heat. "How I wish I were a king myself," he thought, and immediately found himself reclining in silk cushions within the royal carriage. But the carriage proved warmer than expected. Even through thick walls, the sun's heat penetrated relentlessly. "I wish I were the sun," he declared, and found himself sending waves of light and heat across the universe. As the sun, he felt magnificent and all-powerful until thick storm clouds gathered, completely blocking his rays. "I wish to be a cloud." And so he became a massive storm cloud, glorying in his power to block the sun. But as he transformed into falling rain, he encountered an enormous rock that blocked his path completely. "A mere rock more powerful than I? I wish to be a rock." Suddenly, he stood tall upon the mountainside, feeling he had achieved true permanence. But soon, he heard chipping sounds at his base. Looking down, he saw a tiny human figure cutting chunks of stone away. "A puny creature more powerful than me! I want to be a man again!" And so he found himself once more a stonecutter, climbing familiar mountain paths. But now something had changed. As he shaped stones and felt mountain breezes, his heart swelled with deep contentment. His song returned, richer than before, because he had learned to be content with exactly who he was. The Buddha once said, "Health is the greatest gift, contentment the greatest wealth." This ancient wisdom illuminates the endless cycle of wanting that keeps us from recognizing the abundance already present in our lives. Why do we chase after different conditions, always believing happiness lies in the next transformation? Each desire fulfilled only reveals the next desire, creating an endless cycle of dissatisfaction. The stonecutter's journey reveals the futility of seeking happiness through external circumstances. Consider your own versions of this cycle. "I'll be happy when I get promoted," only to discover new stresses. "I'll be content with more money," only to find greater wealth brings new worries. Each achievement reveals the next mountain to climb. Zen teacher Suzuki Roshi said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." This paradox points to the heart of contentment, the ability to fully accept what is, while still engaging wholeheartedly with life's natural changes. The stonecutter's final transformation wasn't into something greater, but into appreciation for what he had always been. His work remained the same, but his relationship to life was completely transformed. Contentment isn't found in having different experiences, but in bringing different awareness to whatever experiences arise. Tonight, as you notice the mind's habitual reaching toward what's not here, can you experiment with the stonecutter's final wisdom? Can you find the song that emerges when you stop trying to be anything other than what you are? As the Buddha taught, contentment is natural wealth, luxury is artificial poverty. The greatest transformation available isn't becoming something different, but recognizing the inherent completeness of what we already are. Now, let us explore a story about the nature of genuine assistance and the goal of true teaching. This is the encounter between the psychiatrist and the Zen master. At a gathering of professionals and spiritual teachers, a psychiatrist found himself in conversation with a renowned Zen master. The psychiatrist had built his career on helping people work through their psychological difficulties, analyzing their problems, and providing therapeutic interventions designed to improve their mental health and emotional well-being. Curious about how different approaches to helping might compare, the psychiatrist decided to ask the master a direct question that had been on his mind throughout their conversation. I've spent years learning various techniques for helping people with their emotional and psychological struggles, the psychiatrist said. I'm curious about your approach. Exactly how do you help people? The master listened to the question with the same calm attention he brought to everything, considering not just the words but the assumptions underlying them. After a moment of thoughtful silence, he offered a response that was both simple and profound. I get them to a place where they can't ask any more questions, the master replied. The psychiatrist paused, uncertain whether this was meant as a serious answer or perhaps some kind of Zen riddle. I'm not sure I understand, he said. Surely questioning is important in any process of growth and understanding. The master smiled gently. Questions arise from the mind that believes it lacks something. When someone reaches the place where questions naturally cease, they have found what they were truly seeking all along. Buddha's wisdom tells us, doubt everything, find your own light. Yet this ancient teaching reveals a paradox. True finding comes not through endless questioning, but through arriving at a completeness where questions become unnecessary. Why do we assume that helping people means providing answers to their questions when the deepest healing might involve dissolving the questioner itself? Zen Buddhism points to the possibility that many of our problems exist only because we continue to ask the questions that create and maintain them. The psychiatrist's approach, like that of most helping professions, focuses on analyzing problems, understanding their origins, and developing strategies for managing or resolving them. This method has value and can provide genuine relief for many forms of suffering. But the master's approach suggests something more radical. Helping people transcend the very framework that generates their problems. Consider the endless questions that occupy your own mind. How can I be happier? Why do I keep making the same mistakes? What should I do with my life? How can I find meaning? Each question implies a questioner who lacks something, who needs something, who must figure something out. But what if the questioner itself is the source of the seeking? In Zen practice, we discover that many of our problems are maintained by the very effort to solve them. The mind that constantly asks, how can I find peace, is the same mind that disturbs the peace that is naturally present. The person who desperately seeks enlightenment may be reinforcing the very sense of separation that creates the feeling of being unenlightened. The master's method of getting people where they can't ask any more questions isn't about suppressing inquiry or promoting ignorance. Rather, it's about guiding people to a direct experience of completeness where questions naturally dissolve because there's nothing more to seek. Zen Master Bankai taught, "The unborn Buddha mind can handle anything that comes up." When someone truly realizes their fundamental completeness, questions about how to be complete simply cease to arise. Problems don't need to be solved. They're recognized as temporary appearances in the vast space of awareness. This doesn't mean practical questions disappear entirely. What should I have for lunch? Or which route should I take to work? Are functional questions that serve practical purposes. The questions that cease are the existential ones that arise from a fundamental sense of lack or incompleteness. The Buddha said, "There is nothing to do, nothing to gain, nothing to lose." This teaching points to the same understanding the Master was indicating. True help comes not from giving people more to do or figure out, but from helping them realize they are already what they seek. Look deeply at your own relationship with questions and seeking. How much of your mental energy goes toward trying to solve the problem of your life rather than living it? What would remain if you stopped asking the questions that assume something is fundamentally wrong or missing? The psychiatrist helps by analyzing and providing tools. The master helps by pointing to what needs no analysis or improvement. Both approaches can serve, but the master's method aims for the root rather than the branches, dissolving the seeker rather than satisfying the seeking. Tonight, as you notice the questions that typically occupy your mind, can you sense what lies beneath them? Can you find the space of awareness that exists prior to all questions, the completeness that needs no answers because it lacks nothing? As the Buddha observed, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. The deepest help we can receive or offer others is the recognition that what we seek has never been absent. Questions cease, not because they've been answered, but because the one who was asking them discovers there was never actually anything to ask about. Let us now turn to a tale about the thin boundary between heaven and hell within our own hearts. This is the story of the samurai and the gates. In feudal Japan, a battle-hardened warrior named Nobushige sought out the renowned Zen master Hakuin. The samurai's armor bore the scars of countless conflicts, and his eyes carried the weight of a man who had seen too much violence. He approached the master's simple dwelling with a question that had been burning in his mind since his last campaign. "Master Hakuin," Nobushige said, bowing stiffly in his heavy armor, "I have spent my life fighting for my lord, facing death countless times. Tell me truthfully, is there really a paradise and a hell awaiting us after death?" Hakuin looked up from his tea, studying the warrior with penetrating eyes. "Who are you to ask such a question?" he inquired calmly. "I am a samurai," Nobushige replied with pride, straightening his shoulders. "I serve my lord with honor and have never retreated from battle." Hakuin's expression suddenly shifted to one of disdain. "You, a soldier?" he exclaimed with a dismissive laugh. "What kind of ruler would have you as his guard? Look at yourself. Your face looks like that of a common beggar, weathered and crude. How could someone so lowly claim to be a protector of nobility?" The words struck Nobushige like physical blows. His face flushed red with anger, and his hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his sword. The insult to his honor was unbearable. "So, you have a sword," Hakuin continued, his voice dripping with mockery. "Your weapon is probably much too dull to cut off my head. I doubt you could slice through a rice paper screen, let alone defend anyone of importance." Unable to contain his rage any longer, Nobushige began to draw his sword, the steel singing as it emerged from its scabbard. His entire body trembled with fury. His vision narrowed to focus solely on this insolent monk who dared to question his honor. At that precise moment, as the blade caught the afternoon light, Hakuin spoke with sudden clarity. "Here, open the gates of hell!" The words pierced through Nobushige's rage like an arrow finding its target. In that instant, he saw himself clearly, consumed by anger, ready to kill over wounded pride, his mind clouded by fury. He understood that hell was not some distant realm, but the very state he inhabited in that moment. The samurai's hand froze on his sword as recognition dawned across his features. Slowly, with great reverence, Nobushige sheathed his sword and bowed deeply before the master, his anger transformed into profound gratitude. "Here open the gates of paradise," Hakuin said gently, his voice now filled with compassion. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is a startling revelation about the geography of our inner world. Heaven and hell are not distant destinations, but present moment experiences we create through the quality of our consciousness. Why do we so easily find ourselves at the gates of hell? Zen Buddhism points to the three poisons that cloud our minds: greed, hatred, and delusion. When Nobushige's pride was wounded, hatred arose instantly, transforming a peaceful afternoon into a realm of suffering. His entire reality shifted from curiosity about the afterlife to murderous rage in mere moments. The deeper teaching here shows us that we carry within ourselves the capacity for both states. Paradise and hell are not places we go to after death. They are experiences we inhabit while living. Each moment offers us the choice between the hell of reactivity and the paradise of awareness. Consider how often throughout your day similar transformations occur. A critical email arrives, and suddenly your peaceful morning becomes a realm of anxiety and resentment. Someone cuts you off in traffic, and the spaciousness of your drive contracts into a tight knot of irritation. A thoughtless comment from a colleague, and your contentment dissolves into hurt feelings and defensive thoughts. In Zen practice, we cultivate the capacity to recognize these moments of transition. Like Nobushige drawing his sword, we learn to catch ourselves at the very moment we're about to enter hell through our reactions. This recognition itself becomes the key that opens the gates of paradise. Zen master Huangpo taught, "The foolish reject what they see, not what they think. The wise reject what they think, not what they see." When we're caught in reactivity, we're rejecting the present moment, the master's teaching, the opportunity for awakening in favor of our thoughts about how things should be. The Buddha said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." Hakuin's apparent insults were not cruelty but compassion in disguise. By provoking Nobushige's anger so skillfully, he showed the warrior exactly what he needed to see. That hell is a state of mind we enter through our own choices. This teaching invites us to examine our own triggers. What words or situations instantly transport us to hell? Perhaps it's feeling unappreciated at work, being misunderstood by family, or facing unexpected challenges. Each of these experiences offers the same choice Nobushige faced. Will we draw our sword or recognize the teaching? Tonight, as you notice irritation arising in response to some frustration, can you remember Hakuin's lesson? Can you recognize the moment when you're about to enter hell through your reactions and instead choose the paradise of awareness? As the Buddha taught, what we think, we become. In each moment, we are either opening the gates of hell through unconscious reactivity or opening the gates of paradise through mindful presence. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us explore a story about the most fundamental truth that surrounds us yet remains invisible. This is the tale of the fish and the ocean. In the vast depths of the Pacific, where sunlight filtered down through layers of blue and green, and coral gardens swayed in gentle currents, a young fish swam restlessly through familiar waters. Despite being surrounded by the wonder of ocean life, schools of silver fish moving like liquid metal, sea anemones dancing in the current, and the rhythmic pulse of waves far above, the young fish felt troubled by a persistent question. One day, approaching an ancient sea turtle whose shell bore the scars and wisdom of countless journeys, the young fish asked earnestly, "Elder, I keep hearing other sea creatures talk about something they call the ocean. They speak of it with such reverence, as if it's the most important thing in existence. But I've searched everywhere, and I cannot find this ocean anywhere. What exactly is this mysterious thing everyone talks about?" The old turtle's eyes, deep and patient like tidal pools, regarded the young fish with gentle amusement. "Little one," the turtle replied in a voice worn smooth by decades of storms and calms, "the ocean is this very thing that surrounds you on all sides at every moment." The young fish looked around frantically, darting left and right, swimming up toward the distant surface and down toward the sandy bottom. "But I don't see anything surrounding me. There's nothing here but water and fish and plants and rocks. Where is this ocean you speak of? Why can't I see it?" The turtle settled more comfortably on a bed of soft kelp, understanding that this was a teaching moment that required patience. "Of course you cannot see it, young friend," the turtle explained. "The ocean is both inside and outside of you. You were born in the ocean. You breathe the ocean. You are nourished by the ocean. And one day you will return to the ocean. The ocean flows through your gills and around your body just as naturally as your own scales cover your skin. It is so much a part of you that it has become invisible." The young fish paused, beginning to sense something vast and fundamental that had been present all along but remained unnamed. "You mean this water I swim through?" "Is the ocean, yes," the turtle confirmed. "You have never been separate from it, not for a single moment of your existence. As the Buddha observed, all conditioned things are impermanent. Strive on with awareness." This ancient wisdom illuminates our relationship with the Tao, the fundamental flow of existence that permeates everything, yet remains largely unnoticed in our daily lives. What emerges from this story is a profound teaching about the nature of spiritual blindness. Like the fish who cannot see the ocean, we live immersed in the sacred, but fail to recognize it because it is too close, too constant, too fundamental to our existence to register as separate from ourselves. Why do we struggle to perceive the Tao, this universal flow that sustains and surrounds us? Zen Buddhism points to our habit of seeking the extraordinary while overlooking the ordinary. We imagine that spiritual truth must be dramatic, mystical, or separate from everyday experience. We look for God in burning bushes while missing the divine presence in morning coffee, in the breath entering our lungs, in the simple fact of awareness itself. The Tao expresses itself in everything we encounter: the changing seasons, the cycles of sleep and waking, the rhythm of our heartbeat, the way thoughts arise and dissolve in consciousness. It is the organizing principle behind both the spiral of galaxies and the unfurling of fern leaves, the same pattern expressing itself at every scale of existence. Consider how often throughout your day you might glimpse this underlying flow without recognizing it. The way traffic naturally organizes itself, despite having no central controller. The way conversations find their own rhythm and timing. The way your body breathes without conscious direction. The way solutions to problems seem to emerge from somewhere beyond deliberate thinking. These are all expressions of the Tao working through apparent chaos to create spontaneous order. Zen teacher Alan Watts taught, "Trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth." The Tao is similar. It cannot be grasped or contained because we are expressions of it rather than separate observers of it. Every attempt to understand the Tao through conceptual thinking is like the fish trying to get outside the ocean to examine it objectively. This doesn't mean the Tao is merely a philosophical concept. It is the most practical and immediate reality. The intelligence that coordinates the trillions of cells in your body. The awareness in which all thoughts and sensations appear. The life force that animates everything from redwood trees to bacteria. In Chinese philosophy, the character for Tao literally means the way or the path. But this is not a path we walk towards some distant destination. It is the path that walks itself through us, the way reality unfolds moment by moment, without requiring our management or control. Lao Tzu wrote, "The Tao that can be spoken is not the eternal Tao." Yet here we are, using words to point towards something beyond words. This is the beautiful paradox of spiritual teaching. We must use the limited to point toward the unlimited, knowing that the finger pointing at the moon is never the moon itself. Tonight, as you feel the breath moving in and out of your body without your conscious control, can you sense the Tao expressing itself through this simple miracle? Can you recognize in this automatic process the same intelligence that moves the planets and changes the seasons? The Buddha taught, "Look within, thou art the Buddha." You are not separate from the ocean of existence any more than a wave is separate from the sea. In recognizing this fundamental non-separation, we stop seeking the Tao and begin living as its conscious expression. Now, let us explore a story about the difference between submission and genuine understanding. This is the lesson of the proud priest and the gentle master. Master Bankei had gained quite a reputation throughout the region. Unlike other teachers who filled their talks with complex philosophical arguments and lengthy quotations from ancient texts, Bankei spoke directly from his heart to the hearts of his listeners. His words were simple but profound, accessible to farmers and scholars alike. People from all walks of life, merchants, servants, samurai, and monks, gathered to hear him speak about the natural peace that exists within every person. The master's growing popularity began to trouble a priest from the Nichiren sect, whose own temple had grown noticeably emptier as his followers left to hear about Zen. This priest had built his identity around being learned, respected, and obeyed. He prided himself on his knowledge of scriptures and his ability to win theological debates. The idea that a simple Zen teacher could attract his devoted followers with plain speaking felt like a personal insult. Determined to expose what he assumed must be shallow teaching disguised as wisdom, the Nichiren priest stormed into one of Bankai's gatherings. He pushed through the crowd of seated listeners, his robes billowing dramatically, his face stern with righteous indignation. The peaceful atmosphere of quiet attention was suddenly charged with tension as people turned to see what was happening. "Hey, Zen teacher!" the priest called out loudly, his voice echoing through the hall. The deliberate rudeness of his address was unmistakable. He was treating the revered master like a common street performer. "Wait just a minute. I have something to say to you." Bankai looked up calmly from where he sat, showing no sign of irritation or defensiveness at the interruption. His eyes held the same gentle attention he gave to every person who approached him, whether they came with genuine questions or hostile challenges. "All these people here respect you and will obey whatever you say," the priest continued, his voice growing louder as he warmed to his challenge. "But a man like myself does not respect you at all. Can you make me obey you? Can your so-called wisdom compel someone who sees through your simple tricks?" The crowd held its breath, expecting either an angry response or a learned rebuttal that would put this arrogant challenger in his place. Instead, Bankai smiled with what appeared to be genuine warmth and curiosity. "Please come up beside me," the master said gently, "and I will show you." The priest, feeling triumphant that he had provoked a response and confident in his ability to expose whatever manipulation was about to unfold, proudly pushed his way through the crowd to the front of the hall. He stood beside the master's simple cushion, his chest puffed out with self-importance, ready to demonstrate his independence from this supposed authority. "Thank you," Bankei said with the same gentle smile. "Now we might hear each other better if you come over to my left side. Please step over here." Without thinking, the priest moved to Bankai's left side. It seemed like a reasonable request after all. "Actually," Bankai continued thoughtfully, "perhaps we could speak more clearly if you were on my right side instead. Would you mind stepping over there?" Again, the priest complied automatically. It was such a small, sensible adjustment that he didn't even notice he was following instructions. Bankai's smile deepened, his eyes twinkling with gentle amusement. "You see," he observed quietly, "you are already obeying me. And I think you are actually a very gentle, cooperative person. Now please sit down and listen to what I have to share." The priest stood frozen, suddenly realizing what had just happened. He had come to demonstrate his independence and superiority, but had instead revealed his natural willingness to respond cooperatively to kind, reasonable requests. His whole argument had dissolved not through force or clever rhetoric, but through his own unconscious behavior. The crowd remained silent, but many people were struggling not to smile. They had witnessed something remarkable, not a defeat or humiliation, but a gentle revelation. The master had shown that true influence comes not from demanding obedience, but from inviting natural cooperation. The priest felt his anger and arrogance melting away, replaced by something he hadn't expected: curiosity. How had this simple man accomplished what felt like magic? How had he transformed a hostile confrontation into a moment of mutual understanding without ever raising his voice or asserting his authority? Still somewhat dazed by the experience, the priest sat down. As Bankai began to speak again, the words seemed to bypass his analytical mind and speak directly to his heart. For the first time in years, He listened not to find flaws or prepare counter-arguments, but simply to hear what was being offered. Buddha's wisdom tells us, true obedience is not blind submission, but conscious harmony. This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between the compliance that comes from fear or social pressure and the natural cooperation that arises from genuine understanding. Why do we so often confuse authority with authoritarianism, influence with coercion? Zen Buddhism points to our conditioning around power. We assume that getting others to cooperate requires force, manipulation, or the assertion of superiority. But the deepest teaching here shows us that true leadership emerges from understanding human nature, not from overpowering it. The priest came expecting to encounter someone who would try to dominate him because that was the only model of authority he knew, when instead he met someone who simply invited his natural cooperativeness. His entire framework for understanding power and influence was gently challenged. Consider your own experiences with authority. The teachers, bosses, or leaders who most positively influenced your life. Did they command your respect through force, or did they earn it by appealing to your better nature? The difference is profound. Forced compliance creates resentment and resistance, while invited cooperation creates genuine change. In our daily relationships, we often fall into the same trap as the priest. We approach conflicts assuming we need to overpower others to get what we want. We prepare arguments, marshal our defenses, and ready ourselves for battle. But Banki's approach suggests a different possibility. What if we assumed the best about others and invited their natural wisdom to emerge? Zen teacher Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "When another person makes you suffer, it is because he suffers deeply within himself, and his suffering is spilling over." The priest's aggression came from his own insecurity and fear of being displaced. Bankai's genius lay in seeing past the hostile surface to the suffering underneath, then responding to the suffering rather than the aggression. This doesn't mean being passive or allowing ourselves to be mistreated. Bankai maintained clear boundaries and didn't submit to the priest's demands for a debate. Instead, he redirected the energy of the encounter towards something more constructive. He transformed a potential power struggle into a teaching moment. The Buddha taught, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. This principle applies not just to obvious hatred, but to all forms of resistance and conflict. When we meet resistance with resistance, we simply create more tension. When we meet resistance with understanding, we create space for transformation. Tonight, as you consider the relationships and situations in your life where you feel the need to assert your will or defend your position, can you remember the gentle master who never commanded obedience, yet received complete cooperation? Can you find ways to invite others' natural wisdom rather than trying to overpower their resistance? As the Buddha observed, in separateness lies the world's greatest misery. In compassion lies the world's true strength. True authority comes not from the power to make others obey, but from the wisdom to help them discover their own desire to cooperate in creating something beautiful together. Let us now turn to a tale about the courage to trust life's current. This is the story of the Crystal River. In the depths of a great crystal river, where water flowed clear as mountain air, there lived an entire village of small creatures. The river's current moved above them like a gentle breath, carrying the wisdom of countless springs and distant seas. Young and old, rich and poor, all made their home along the sandy bottom. each creature grasping tightly to stones, branches, and roots. For generations, clinging had been their way of survival. Every creature learned from birth to wrap their appendages around river rocks and fallen wood. "Hold on," the elders would say. "The current is dangerous. It will sweep you away to places unknown. Safety lies in staying exactly where you are." But one small creature grew weary of this endless grasping. Day after day, he watched the current flow overhead, seeing how it moved with such purpose and grace. While his neighbors complained about the effort required to maintain their grip, he found himself wondering what it might feel like to trust that flowing water. "I am tired of clinging," he announced one morning. "Though I cannot see where it leads, I trust that the current knows its destination. I shall let go and allow it to carry me where it will, for I fear that if I continue clinging, I shall die of boredom before I ever truly live." The other creatures gasped in horror. "Fool!" they cried. "Let go, and that current will tumble you mercilessly across the rocks below. You will be battered and broken, dying far more quickly than any boredom could kill you." But the small creature had made his decision. Taking one last look at his neighbors, he released his grip on the familiar stone. Immediately, the current seized him, and just as the others had predicted, he was tumbled and tossed across the rocky bottom. His small body struck stone after stone, each impact bringing pain he had never experienced while safely clinging. Yet something remarkable began to happen. As the creature continued to surrender to the current's power, refusing to grab for new anchors despite his pain, the water gradually lifted him higher from the dangerous bottom. The tumbling ceased. The rocks could no longer reach him. Now he flowed with the current itself, no longer fighting its direction, but becoming one with its movement. As he traveled downstream, creatures in distant parts witnessed something they had never seen. Here was one of their own kind, yet he appeared to be flying through the water, moving with the elegant power of the current itself. "See a miracle!" they called out. "A creature like ourselves, yet he soars. Surely he is the Messiah, come to save us all." The flowing creature heard their cries and felt compassion for their misunderstanding. "I am no more Messiah than any of you," he called back. "The river delights in lifting us all free, if only we dare to let go. Our true work is not clinging to the bottom, but embracing this voyage, this grand adventure of trust and flow." But the creatures only cried louder, "Savior, Savior!" Even as they spoke, they tightened their grips on rocks and roots. They watched until he disappeared around a bend, then began weaving legends about the miraculous Savior who had briefly graced their village. Buddha's wisdom reminds us, you only lose what you cling to. This ancient teaching illuminates the profound paradox at the heart of human experience. We spend our lives grasping for security and control, believing that our safety depends on holding tight to familiar circumstances. Yet in this very grasping, we create the suffering we seek to avoid. Why do we cling so desperately when the current offers to carry us toward unknown adventures? Zen Buddhism reveals that from early childhood, we learn the known is safe and the unknown dangerous. This conditioning becomes a spiritual obstacle when it prevents growth beyond familiar limitations. We also suffer from the illusion of control, believing that by grasping circumstances, relationships, and identities, we can stop the natural flow of change. This creates enormous tension because it puts us in opposition to reality itself. Life is constant movement, and when we resist this truth, we exhaust ourselves fighting currents far more powerful than our individual will. Consider the areas of your life where you find yourself clinging. Perhaps it's a relationship that has outgrown its original form, a career that no longer brings joy, or an image of yourself that now constrains your growth. The current of change will flow whether we resist it or not. Our choice is whether to exhaust ourselves in futile opposition or discover the grace available in conscious surrender. The Buddha said, "Nothing is permanent except change." Water doesn't fight the mountainside. It finds the natural pathway down. When we learn to move with life's current rather than against it, we discover effortless effectiveness that rigid resistance can never achieve. Tonight, as you rest in this moment's stillness, what might you be ready to release? Perhaps it's a worry about tomorrow's challenges, a resentment from yesterday's disappointments, or a way of defining yourself that has grown too small. Can you feel into the current of this moment's aliveness and trust its direction? As the Buddha taught, let go of what has passed. Let go of what may come. Let go of what is happening now. Relax right now and rest. In this trust, we discover that the current we feared would destroy us is actually the very force that can carry us home to our true nature. Our next story reveals the difference between knowledge and true awareness. This is the tale of the teacher who thought he had arrived. After a decade of intensive training under various masters, studying countless texts, and dedicating himself wholly to Zen practice, a monk named Tenno finally achieved what he had long sought: recognition as a qualified teacher. His understanding of Buddhist philosophy was profound. His meditation practice was deep and stable, and his ability to guide others had been tested and approved. He received the formal acknowledgement that he was ready to teach the Dharma and help others along the path of awakening. Proud of his accomplishment and eager to learn from one of the most renowned masters of his time, Tenno decided to visit the famous Zen master Nan-in. The older teacher's reputation for wisdom and insight was legendary throughout the region, and Tenno looked forward to engaging in deep Dharma discussions and perhaps receiving some final polishing of his understanding. It was a rainy day when Tenno made his pilgrimage to Nanin's temple. The roads were muddy and slippery, puddles reflected the grey sky, and the steady rainfall required him to carry an umbrella to stay dry. When he reached the temple, he carefully removed his wooden clogs and placed them on the covered porch along with his umbrella, just as custom dictated. He arranged his outer robes, composed himself properly, and entered the temple to meet the great master. Nan-in received him graciously, bowing with the respect due to a fellow teacher, while maintaining the dignity of his greater experience. They sat together in the simple receiving room, and Tenno expected their conversation to focus on sophisticated points of doctrine, subtle aspects of meditation technique, or perhaps the challenges of guiding students. Instead, after the initial pleasantries, Nanin asked what seemed like an absurdly mundane question. "I noticed you left your wooden clogs and umbrella on the porch when you entered. Tell me, did you place your umbrella to the left of your shoes or to the right?" Tenno was caught completely off guard. Of all the profound topics they could discuss, why was this renowned master asking about such a trivial detail? He tried to recall the moment he had arranged his belongings, but realized with growing dismay that he had no idea. He had been so focused on the importance of this meeting, so preoccupied with the impressive conversation he expected to have, that he had performed the simple act of arranging his belongings in complete unconsciousness. I don't know, Tenno admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. In that moment of confession, the full implications of his ignorance became clear to him. Here he was, a certified teacher of mindfulness and awareness, and he couldn't even remember a simple action he had performed just minutes earlier. Nanin smiled with infinite compassion, not mockery. "Then you have not yet attained full awareness," he said gently. "Someone who is truly awake pays complete attention to every moment, every action, every detail of experience. The way you arrange your belongings reflects the same quality of attention you bring to meditation, to teaching, to all of life." In that instant, Tenno's pride in his accomplishments crumbled, replaced by a humbling recognition of how much deeper his practice needed to go. He understood that true awareness isn't something you achieve once and then possess forever. It's a quality of attention that must be cultivated and maintained in every single moment, in the most ordinary activities as well as the most exalted spiritual practices. Without hesitation, Tenno requested to become Nanin's student. For the next 10 years, he studied under the master's guidance, learning to bring the same quality of conscious attention to placing his shoes that he brought to formal meditation, to treat the arrangement of an umbrella with the same reverence he showed to sacred texts. When he finally left Nanin's temple, he was a completely different kind of teacher, one who understood that enlightenment is not a destination, but a way of traveling, not an achievement, but a continuous practice of complete presence. As the Buddha observed, if you want to know your past, look at your present condition. If you want to know your future, look at your present actions. What emerges from this story is the recognition that true spiritual development is measured not by our peak experiences, but by the quality of attention we bring to ordinary moments. Why do we assume that enlightenment exists only in special circumstances, formal practices, or elevated states of consciousness? Zen Buddhism teaches that awakening is found precisely in our ability to be fully present for whatever is actually happening, whether it's sitting in meditation or simply placing an umbrella beside our shoes. Tenno's mistake was common among spiritual practitioners. He had developed the ability to be mindful during designated practice periods, but hadn't yet learned to extend that same quality of awareness to everyday activities. He could be present while sitting in meditation, but unconscious while performing simple tasks. This split between spiritual activities and ordinary activities is one of the most subtle traps on the path of awakening. We imagine that consciousness is something we turn on during meditation and turn off during mundane tasks. But true practice integrates awareness into every aspect of life. Consider your own daily routine. How present are you while brushing your teeth, making coffee, or putting on your shoes? Do you perform these activities with the same quality of attention you might bring to more important tasks? The gap between formal practice and informal practice often reveals where our awareness needs to deepen. Zen Master Dogen taught, practice and enlightenment are one. This means that the quality of consciousness we cultivate in any moment is both the path and the destination. There's no separation between developing awareness and being aware. Every moment offers a complete opportunity for awakening. Nanin's question wasn't about umbrellas and shoes. It was about whether Tenno's spiritual development had penetrated into the cellular level of his daily existence. Could he maintain the same presence while performing unconscious habits that he brought to conscious spiritual practice? The Buddha said, Mindfulness is the path to the deathless. Heedlessness is the path to death. Those who are mindful do not die. Those who are heedless are as if dead already. True aliveness is found in complete presence, and complete presence can be cultivated in any activity, no matter how simple or mundane. Look deeply at your own relationship between formal practice and daily life. Where do you treat certain activities as worthy of attention, while others are performed on autopilot? This isn't about becoming obsessively focused on every tiny detail, but about recognizing that the same capacity for presence that serves us in meditation can transform every aspect of our lives. The paradox is that the most ordinary moments often offer the greatest opportunities for awakening. When we're sitting in formal meditation, we expect to be mindful. But when we're simply arranging our belongings or performing routine tasks, we have a chance to discover whether our practice has truly taken root or remains confined to special circumstances. In Zen temples, students are taught that washing dishes is as sacred as chanting sutras, that sweeping floors is as important as studying philosophy. This isn't because these activities are inherently special, but because the quality of consciousness we bring to any activity determines its spiritual value. Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, "Washing dishes is not only a way to have clean dishes. Washing dishes is also a way to live fully in each moment." This points to the fundamental teaching that Nanin was offering Tenno. Every action is an opportunity to practice complete presence. The master's question revealed that Tenno's decade of training had developed his capacity for awareness during designated practice periods, but hadn't yet integrated that awareness into the seamless flow of daily life. He could be conscious when he intended to be conscious, but he hadn't yet learned to make consciousness his default state. This integration is what distinguishes genuine spiritual maturity from mere spiritual knowledge. It's relatively easy to be mindful when we remember to be mindful. The deeper practice is developing the kind of natural awareness that operates whether we're thinking about it or not. Tonight, as you perform the simple actions that end your day, brushing your teeth, changing clothes, arranging items for tomorrow, can you bring the same quality of attention you might give to formal meditation? Can you discover whether your spiritual practice has penetrated into the unconscious habits that make up so much of daily life? Buddha's wisdom reminds us, every moment is a teacher and every place is a classroom. The umbrella beside the shoes was Tenno's teacher that day, revealing exactly where his practice needed to deepen. Sometimes the most profound lessons come disguised as the most ordinary questions, asked by masters wise enough to see that true awakening is found not in transcending the mundane, but in discovering the sacred hidden within it. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a teaching about the temporary nature of all our possessions and positions. This is the story of the inn that calls itself a palace. In ancient India, a renowned spiritual teacher had spent many years wandering from village to village, sharing the Buddha's teachings with anyone who would listen. His reputation for wisdom and compassion had spread throughout the land, reaching even the ears of kings and nobles. One day, during his travels, he arrived at the capital city of a great kingdom, where a magnificent palace rose above the bustling streets like a jeweled crown. The palace was truly a wonder to behold. Its walls were constructed of the finest marble, inlaid with precious stones that caught and reflected the sunlight in brilliant cascades of color. Gardens filled with exotic flowers and flowing fountains surrounded the structure, and guards in gleaming armor stood at attention throughout the grounds. It was clearly the dwelling of someone who commanded immense wealth and power. The spiritual teacher approached the main entrance with the same calm dignity he brought to every encounter, whether with kings or beggars. The guards, recognizing him by his simple robes and serene presence, made no move to stop him. Word of his arrival had preceded him, and they had been instructed to allow him passage. Walking through corridors lined with silk tapestries and golden statues, the teacher made his way directly to the throne room, where the king sat upon an elaborately carved chair elevated above the marble floor. Courtiers in fine clothes gathered around the throne, their jeweled ornaments glinting in the light from tall windows. The king, a middle-aged man wearing robes of deep purple silk and a crown of gold and diamonds, looked up as the teacher entered. He had been expecting this visit, though he wasn't entirely sure what to expect from their encounter. "What do you want?" the king asked directly, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate answers and unquestioning obedience. The teacher bowed respectfully, but spoke with quiet confidence. "Your Majesty, I would like a place to sleep in this inn." A ripple of surprise moved through the assembled courtiers. The king's eyebrows rose, and his expression shifted from curiosity to confusion. "But this is not an inn," the king replied, gesturing to the opulent surroundings. "This is my palace. I am the ruler of this kingdom, and this has been the seat of royal power for generations." The teacher nodded thoughtfully, as if considering this information carefully. "I see. May I ask, Your Majesty, who owned this palace before you?" "My father," the king replied, his tone becoming slightly defensive. "He ruled here for 30 years before his death. This palace was his seat of power, as it is now mine." "Ah," the teacher said with genuine interest. "And who owned it before him?" "My grandfather," the king answered, beginning to sense where these questions might lead. "He too ruled from this throne. He also is dead." The teacher paused, allowing the weight of these words to settle in the vast throne room. The courtiers had grown quiet, sensing the profound direction of this unusual conversation. Even the king found himself waiting, almost despite himself, for the teacher's response. Finally, the teacher spoke with gentle clarity that seemed to fill every corner of the ornate room. "And this place where people live for a short time and then move on, did I hear you say that it is not an inn?" The silence that followed was complete. The king sat motionless on his throne, the teacher's words penetrating layers of assumption and identity he had never questioned. The courtiers remained frozen, as if witnessing something beyond their normal understanding of royal protocol and worldly power. The Buddha taught, "All conditioned things are impermanent. Work out your salvation with diligence." This profound truth reveals itself in the teacher's penetrating question about the inn that calls itself a palace. Why do we cling so fiercely to possessions and positions that are, by their very nature, temporary? Zen Buddhism explains that our attachment to permanence creates suffering because it conflicts with the fundamental reality of impermanence. Everything we think we own, including our own bodies and identities, we hold only temporarily. Look deeply at your own experience. The house you call yours, the car you drive, the job title you carry, the bank account balance you monitor, all of these are temporary arrangements. You inhabit them for a period of time, then move on, just as others inhabited them before you and will inhabit them after you. This doesn't mean we should become indifferent to our responsibilities or careless with our possessions. Rather, it invites us to hold them more lightly. recognizing their transient nature. The king's palace was indeed magnificent and served important functions, but it was also unmistakably an inn where occupants stayed temporarily before departing. The deeper teaching here shows us how identification with temporary roles creates unnecessary suffering when we forget the impermanent nature of our positions, whether as parent, professional, homeowner, or even student of Zen. We create anxiety trying to maintain what cannot be permanently maintained. Consider your own attachments. Perhaps it's your professional identity, your relationships, your health, or your spiritual achievements. Each of these is precious and worthy of care, but each is also subject to change. The executive becomes retired, the parent becomes empty nester, the student becomes teacher, the healthy person faces illness. These transitions are not failures, but natural expressions of impermanence. Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh taught, "Thanks to impermanence, everything is possible." This teaching reframes impermanence from something to fear into something to celebrate. Because nothing lasts forever. Suffering states can transform into joy. Closed hearts can open to love. And even the most entrenched patterns can shift toward wisdom. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called non-attachment, caring deeply while holding lightly. This doesn't mean we become cold or indifferent, but that we learn to love without clinging, to work without grasping, and to enjoy without demanding permanence. The spiritual teacher's insight pierces through the illusion that any of us are permanent owners of anything. We are all temporary guests in the inn of existence, borrowing our roles and possessions for the brief time we inhabit them. This recognition can bring either despair or profound liberation, depending on how we receive it. Buddha spoke of this when he said, "Everything is impermanent. Try to accomplish as much virtue as possible." This teaching encourages us not to waste our temporary time in the inn, but to use it wisely, cultivating love, wisdom, and compassion while we have the opportunity. Tonight, as you rest in your own temporary dwelling, surrounded by your own temporary possessions, can you feel the profound freedom that comes with recognizing their transient nature? Can you sense how this recognition might actually increase your appreciation rather than diminish it? As the Buddha taught, of all footprints, that of the elephant is supreme. Similarly, of all meditative themes, that on death is supreme. By remembering the temporary nature of our stay in this inn called life, we discover the urgency and preciousness of each moment we're given to practice love and awareness. Let us now turn to a story about the relationship between outer circumstances and inner cultivation. This is the tale of the horse and the mind. In a remote mountain region where execution grounds served as sobering reminders of mortality, Zen master Bankai sought to test the depth of his spiritual realization. For several nights, he sat in meditation beneath a wooden crucifix, using the proximity of death to penetrate more deeply into the nature of existence. After completing this intense retreat, Bankai made his way to a nearby area where he could rest. He found a peaceful spot on an embankment surrounding a horse corral where he lay down to continue his contemplation under the open sky. As he rested there, absorbed in profound silence, a harsh sound shattered his peace. From within the corral came the violent sounds of a warrior brutally beating his horse. The animal's cries mixed with the sharp crack of a whip and angry shouts of a man losing control. Master Bankei observed this scene with growing concern. The warrior was clearly frustrated, taking out his inner turmoil on the innocent animal. Each blow seemed to make the horse more agitated, rather than more compliant, creating a vicious cycle of violence and resistance. Unable to remain silent, Bankei called out from his position. "Hey, what do you think you are doing?" The warrior, absorbed in rage, ignored the interruption and continued his harsh treatment. The beating intensified, and so did Bankai's concern for both the animal and the man degrading himself through such cruelty. "Hey!" Bankei called out again, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years cultivating inner peace. "What do you think you are doing?" Still, the warrior continued, lost in frustration and anger. The horse became increasingly panicked, which only seemed to fuel the man's determination to force compliance through violence. A third time, Bankai's voice rang out. "Hey! What do you think you are doing?" This time, something in the master's tone penetrated the warrior's rage. The man stopped his beating, climbed down from his horse, and approached the embankment. As he drew closer, his expression changed. There was something about this stranger that commanded respect, a quality of presence that spoke of deep, inner development. "You were yelling at me," the warrior said, his voice still carrying traces of anger, but now mixed with curiosity. "Do you have something to tell me?" Bankei looked at the man with compassion, seeing not an enemy, but someone caught in the same cycles of frustration that trap us all. His response was simple yet profound. "Rather than beat your horse for being unruly, why not chastise yourself and train your own mind right?" The words hung in the air between them, like a bridge connecting two very different approaches to dealing with difficulty. The warrior had been trying to solve his problem through external force and control. Bankei was pointing to an entirely different possibility. As the Buddha observed, conquer anger with non-anger, conquer badness with goodness, conquer meanness with generosity, conquer dishonesty with truth. This teaching captures the essence of what Bankei offered the frustrated warrior. The recognition that our external struggles mirror our internal state. What emerges from this story is the profound insight that we cannot successfully force the world to conform to our expectations through aggression or control. The warrior's approach, beating the horse into submission, represents how we often try to manage difficult circumstances in our own lives. We become frustrated with external conditions and respond with force, criticism, or manipulation, never recognizing that the real work lies within. Why do we instinctively blame external circumstances for our frustration? Buddhist psychology explains that the untrained mind seeks to maintain its comfort by controlling its environment, rather than developing the flexibility to respond skillfully to whatever arises. This creates what Zen calls pushing the river, exhausting ourselves, trying to force reality to match our preferences. Consider how this pattern manifests in daily life. The computer that crashes during an important project becomes the target of our anger, when the real issue is our attachment to having technology work perfectly. The traffic jam that makes us late triggers road rage, when the actual problem is our expectation that travel should always be smooth. The family member who doesn't respond to our advice becomes the focus of our frustration, when the deeper issue is our need to control others' choices. In each case, we're like the warrior beating the horse, applying force to external circumstances while ignoring the internal conditions that create our suffering. The horse represents the uncontrollable aspects of life, other people's behavior, natural events, technological failures, and the inherent unpredictability of existence. Zen teacher Pema Chodron writes, "You are the sky, everything else is just the weather." This points to the same truth Bankei offered the warrior. Instead of trying to control the weather of external circumstances, we can develop the spacious awareness that remains calm regardless of conditions. The real training involves learning to work with our own minds, rather than trying to force compliance from the world around us. This doesn't mean becoming passive or accepting harmful situations, but rather approaching challenges from a place of inner stability rather than reactive frustration. Buddhist practice offers specific techniques for this internal training. Mindfulness meditation teaches us to observe our reactive patterns without being swept away by them. Loving kindness practice develops compassion for ourselves and others when things don't go as planned. Contemplation of impermanence helps us accept the changeable nature of all conditions. Tonight, as you encounter the inevitable frustrations of daily life, can you remember Bankai's teaching? When you find yourself wanting to beat the horse of difficult circumstances, can you pause and ask, what would it mean to train my own mind instead? Buddha's wisdom teaches us, hatred is never appeased by hatred in this world. By non-hatred alone is hatred appeased. This is a law eternal. The path to peace lies not in conquering external conditions, but in cultivating the inner qualities that remain stable, regardless of what the world presents. Let us continue our journey with a story about maintaining inner balance regardless of external circumstances. This is the teaching of Master Hakuin and the power of, is that so? Master Hakuin lived in a small village where he was deeply respected for his wisdom, compassion, and exemplary character. For decades, he had maintained a reputation as a pure and enlightened teacher, someone who had transcended ordinary human weaknesses and embodied the highest spiritual ideals. Villagers often brought their problems to him, seeking guidance and inspiration from his teachings and his impeccable way of life. In this same village lived a beautiful young woman whose family was well known and respected. When she became pregnant outside of marriage, her condition caused a scandal that rippled through the tight-knit community. Her parents were furious and demanded to know who was responsible for bringing such shame upon their family. At first, the young woman refused to reveal the father's identity. She was protecting someone she loved, someone whose reputation and future would be destroyed if the truth came out. But as her parents' anger intensified and the pressure became unbearable, she made a desperate decision. In a moment of panic and confusion, she pointed to the one person she thought could weather this storm better than her actual lover, the respected Master Hakuin. When her outraged parents confronted the Zen master with their daughter's accusation, they expected protests of innocence, explanations, or at least some expression of shock at being falsely accused. Instead, Hakuin listened calmly to their angry words and simply replied, "Is that so?" His response only seemed to confirm their worst suspicions. Surely an innocent man would defend himself more vigorously. The scandal exploded throughout the village. People who had revered Hakuin as a saint now whispered that he was a hypocrite who had been living a lie. His reputation was destroyed overnight, and former students abandoned him in disgust and disappointment. When the child was born, the parents brought the baby directly to Hakuin. "This is your responsibility now," they declared bitterly. "Since you are the father, you must take care of this child." They thrust the infant into his arms and walked away, leaving him to face the consequences of a crime he had never committed. Again, Hakuin simply said, "Is that so?" and accepted the baby without protest or explanation. For many months, the former master cared for the child with tender attention. He fed the infant, changed diapers, walked the floors during sleepless nights, and provided all the love and care that any devoted parent would give. Neighbors who had once brought him offerings of food and respect now ignored him or spoke of him with contempt. He had lost his position, his reputation, and his livelihood, but he continued to care for the child with peaceful dedication. Meanwhile, the young woman struggled with the weight of her lie. Watching the revered teacher suffer for her deception while caring lovingly for a child that wasn't his became unbearable. The guilt consumed her until she could no longer live with what she had done. Finally, she confessed the truth to her parents. The real father was a young man in the village whom she had been trying to protect. Her parents were horrified to learn what they had done to an innocent man. They rushed to Hakuin's simple dwelling with profuse apologies. "Master, we have wronged you terribly," they said, bowing deeply. "Our daughter has confessed that you are not the father. We know now that you have suffered unjustly for our mistake. Please forgive us and allow us to take the child back to its real family." Hakuin listened to their apologies with the same equanimity he had shown to their accusations. As he gently placed the baby in their arms, he offered the same response he had given throughout the entire ordeal. "Is that so?" As Buddha's wisdom reminds us, hatred does not cease by hatred, but only by love. This is the eternal rule. What emerges from this story is the profound power of maintaining inner equilibrium regardless of how others perceive us or what circumstances life presents. Why do we allow external events and other people's opinions to determine our inner state? Zen Buddhism teaches that true freedom comes from developing an unshakable center that remains stable, whether we're being praised or blamed, honored or dishonored, treated fairly or unjustly. Hakuin's response, "Is that so?" represents a profound spiritual practice. He wasn't being indifferent or passive. He was demonstrating the ultimate non-attachment to reputation, status, and even justice itself. His consistent response showed that his sense of worth and purpose came from within rather than from external validation. Consider how differently most of us would react to false accusations, public humiliation, and complete loss of reputation. The natural human response is to defend ourselves, to fight against injustice, to demand that others see the truth. But Hakuin's approach reveals another possibility, meeting all circumstances with the same peaceful acceptance. This doesn't mean we should never defend ourselves or that we should passively accept all injustices. Hakuin's teaching is more subtle. He shows us that our inner peace doesn't have to depend on external circumstances being fair or favorable. We can maintain our center regardless of how the world treats us. The Buddha taught, "You will not be punished for your anger, you will be punished by your anger." Hakuin's equanimity protected him from the additional suffering that would have come from resentment, self-pity, or desperate attempts to restore his reputation. While the situation was undoubtedly challenging, he didn't compound the difficulty with emotional resistance. Look deeply at your own reactions to criticism, misunderstanding, or unfair treatment. How much of your suffering comes from the actual events, and how much comes from your mental and emotional responses to those events? Hakuin's example suggests that we have far more control over the second source of suffering than the first. Tonight, as you encounter whatever judgments, misunderstandings, or unfair treatments life may bring, can you remember Master Hakuin's peaceful, Is that so? Can you find the space between what happens to you and how you respond, discovering that your inner peace need not be held hostage by external circumstances? Buddha's wisdom teaches us, peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. True spiritual development isn't measured by how well life treats us, but by how gracefully we can meet whatever life brings, maintaining our compassion, dignity, and inner tranquility, regardless of whether the world recognizes our worth or understands our true nature. Now, let us explore a story about the paradoxical nature of spiritual seeing and the limits of conceptual understanding. This is the teaching of 3 strikes and deeper vision. In the mountain monastery, where the 6th patriarch Hui Neng taught, students came from across China to study with the master, whose realization was said to surpass all others of his time. Among these seekers was a brilliant young monk named Shen Hui, known for his sharp intellect and probing questions. Unlike many students who approached the patriarch with humble requests for basic instruction, Shen Hui often challenged the master with sophisticated philosophical inquiries. One afternoon, as golden sunlight streamed through the monastery windows and the air carried the peaceful sounds of monks going about their daily practice, Shen Hui found the 6th patriarch sitting quietly in the main hall. The master's posture was perfectly still, his breathing soft and natural, his expression serene yet alert, the embodiment of meditation in action. Seeing an opportunity to test his understanding against the master's realization, Shen Hui approached with a question that had been forming in his mind during his own meditation practice. The nature of perception during spiritual practice had become a source of great curiosity and confusion for him. "Hi, Master," Shen Hui said, bowing respectfully but speaking with the confidence of someone who believed his question particularly insightful. "When you sit in meditation, do you see or not?" To Shen Hui, this seemed like a perfectly reasonable inquiry into the mechanics of enlightened awareness. Did awakened consciousness involve special kinds of seeing? Did meditation reveal mystical visions or higher perceptions unavailable to ordinary minds? Or did true realization transcend seeing altogether, existing in some pure state beyond sensory experience? What he received in response was completely unexpected. Without warning, the 6th patriarch picked up his wooden teaching stick and struck Shen Hui 3 times in rapid succession, not gently, but with enough force that the blows stung sharply and left the young monk both physically uncomfortable and mentally bewildered. "When I hit you," the patriarch asked with the same calm tone one might use to discuss the weather, "does it hurt or not?" Shen Hui rubbed his smarting shoulders, his mind racing to understand what had just occurred. The question seemed simple enough, yet something about the context made him suspect that a straightforward answer might be inadequate. The physical sensation was undeniable, yet the spiritual implications felt complex. "It both does and does not hurt," he replied carefully, intuiting that the master was pointing towards some paradox beyond ordinary logic. "I both see and do not see," the 6th patriarch responded, his words carrying the weight of direct experience rather than philosophical speculation. But Shen Hui's intellect wasn't satisfied with paradox. He needed to understand the mechanics, to categorize and explain this teaching in terms his conceptual mind could grasp. "How can you both see and not see?" he pressed, genuine confusion evident in his voice. "That seems contradictory. Either you see during meditation or you don't. How can both be true simultaneously?" The patriarch's response came with the patience of someone who had spent decades helping students move beyond the limitations of dualistic thinking. "What I see," he explained with gentle clarity, "are the waverings and wanderings of my own mind. What I do not see is the right and wrong and good and bad of other people. This is my seeing and not seeing." With these words, the entire teaching crystallized. The master wasn't speaking about mystical visions or transcendent states, but about the fundamental shift in perception that accompanies genuine spiritual maturity. Ancient Buddhist wisdom tells us, the mind is everything. What you think, you become. This teaching relates profoundly to the patriarch's lesson about the nature of awakened seeing. Why do we become confused when spiritual teachings transcend ordinary logic? Zen Buddhism explains that our conceptual mind operates through dualistic categories: seeing or not seeing, pain or no pain, right or wrong. But enlightened awareness doesn't eliminate these experiences. It transforms our relationship to them. The deeper teaching here shows us what authentic spiritual perception actually involves. The patriarch sees his own mental processes clearly, the arising and passing of thoughts, emotions, and reactions. This isn't a mystical power, but the natural result of sustained mindfulness practice. He observes the waverings and wanderings of consciousness without being lost in them. Simultaneously, he doesn't see in the judgmental sense, imposing categories of right and wrong, good and bad onto others' behavior. This non-seeing isn't ignorance, but wisdom, recognizing that such judgments often say more about the observer than the observed. Look deeply at your own patterns of perception. How much of what you think you see in others actually reflects your own mental projections? When someone irritates you, are you seeing their actual behavior clearly? Or are you seeing your own triggers and reactions? When someone impresses you, are you recognizing their genuine qualities? Or are you seeing your own desires for approval or achievement? This ancient wisdom illuminates the difference between reactive perception and clear seeing. Reactive perception involves our past conditioning, our emotional needs, our judgmental habits. Clear seeing involves awareness that recognizes its own processes while remaining open to what's actually present. Zen Master Dogen taught, "To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self." This teaching points to the same insight the patriarch offered. True seeing involves turning attention toward our own mental processes rather than fixating on external judgments and evaluations. The 3 strikes Shen Hui received weren't punishment, but skillful teaching. Physical pain that both does and does not hurt points toward the mystery of conscious experience itself. Pain arises in awareness, is felt fully, yet doesn't define or limit the awareness that experiences it. Similarly, thoughts and emotions arise in consciousness without contaminating its essential clarity. Consider how this teaching might transform your daily experience. Instead of constantly evaluating others' behavior, finding fault, making comparisons, generating opinions, what if you turned that same attention toward observing your own mental reactions? What patterns would you discover in the wanderings and waverings of your own mind? This doesn't mean we become passive or lose our capacity for discernment. Rather, we develop the ability to respond from clarity rather than reactivity. When we see our own judgmental tendencies clearly, we naturally become less caught in them. When we observe our mental projections, we're less likely to mistake them for objective reality. In Zen practice, we cultivate what's called mirror mind, awareness that reflects whatever arises without being stained or changed by it. This mirror sees everything clearly while maintaining its essential emptiness and openness. Tonight, as you notice your mind categorizing and judging the experiences of your day, can you remember the patriarch's teaching? Can you turn your attention toward the seer rather than constantly evaluating what is seen? Can you discover the freedom that comes from seeing your own mental processes without being enslaved by them? Buddha spoke of this when he said, "You yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection." By learning to see our own mental patterns with compassion rather than judgment, we develop the clarity to see others with equal kindness and understanding. Tonight, as we gently draw our time together to a close, can you feel how the tranquility you've discovered wasn't created by these words, but simply uncovered, like brushing dust from something precious that was always there? Can you sense that the deep calm you've touched tonight doesn't belong to these tales alone, but rests quietly within your own being, patiently waiting for moments just like this? The Buddha reminded us that what we think, we become. In the spirit of this wisdom, notice how peace and understanding aren't prizes we must chase or earn through struggle, but natural qualities that emerge when we simply allow ourselves to be present. Each story we've shared tonight has woven together a tapestry of insight, revealing again and again the liberating truth that our suffering lightens when we stop fighting. What is? That genuine freedom flows naturally when we loosen our hold on how things should be. And that lasting contentment comes not from getting what we want, but from finding richness in what already exists. Even when your thoughts wander tomorrow, even when life feels overwhelming again, the understanding you've cultivated tonight has taken root in the depths of your being, ready to offer guidance whenever you need it most. These ancient wisdoms haven't shown you a complicated philosophy or distant ideal, but rather illuminated something beautifully simple, the art of being fully here, in this moment, exactly as it is. As you settle into rest, notice how your breathing has naturally deepened, how your shoulders have released their tension, how your mind has found its way to stillness without force or effort. This is the gift of true teaching. It doesn't add anything new, but helps us remember what we already know in our bones. Tonight, you've tasted that remembering, that gentle return to your own inherent wisdom. The insights you've touched aren't exotic treasures found only in monasteries or meditation halls. They live in the everyday miracle of conscious awareness, in the simple act of paying attention with kindness. As you carry this peaceful awareness back into your world, take with you not just the stories themselves, but the quiet confidence they've awakened, the knowing that this sanctuary of calm travels with you always, available in any moment when you pause and listen inward. May this understanding be your faithful companion, offering light and ease through whatever tomorrow may bring. Thank you for joining us on this journey at Sleepy Monk. Sleep well.